Social construction. Social construction is the invisible architect of our world. It's the quiet force that shapes how we think, what we believe, and how we behave without us ever noticing. At its heart, social construction is the idea that much of what we accept as reality isn't objective or universal. It's built from shared agreements, reinforced by culture, language, and repetition. We don't see this happening. We're born into it. We're handed identities, roles, norms, even definitions of success, failure, love, gender, beauty, and power, all as if they were facts. But they're not. They're scripts written by society and performed so flawlessly by everyone around us that we believe they're true. This means your concept of normal is not natural. It's constructed. Your perception of masculinity, femininity, professionalism, adulthood, even race is not born from biology, but from social agreements that have evolved over time. And that realization is both freeing and terrifying, because if these realities were built by human agreement, they can be questioned, challenged, and even rebuilt. Social construction thrives in repetition and silence. A boy is told not to cry. A girl is told to smile more. We obey without protest because we think that's just how life is. But it's not. It's a design crafted by history, passed through generations, and enforced by systems that reward compliance and punish deviation. When someone defies these constructs by loving differently, dressing freely, or thinking outside the lines, they aren't just being different, they are threatening the illusion. And that's why society resists, because social construction isn't just a theory, it's the invisible prison we mistake for freedom. Symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism is the silent language that controls every conversation, every glance, every interaction you've ever had. It's not about words, it's about meaning. This theory reveals that humans navigate the world not by facts, but by symbols. A wedding ring, a diploma, a job title, a raised eyebrow, none of these have power on their own. Their power comes from the meanings we've all agreed to assign them. And through this shared meaning, we build society. From the moment we're born, we enter a symbolic world. We learn what a smile means. We learn what a frown signals. We learn that some words lift people up while others crush them. Symbolic interactionism is the idea that society isn't some grand, external structure. It's built in the tiny, everyday exchanges we have with others. It's built in how we interpret those interactions and what we believe they say about us. Your identity is not fixed. It's a mirror of how others have responded to you. You become who you believe they see. If the world sees you as strong, you stand taller. If it treats you like a burden, you shrink. We don't just react to the world, we react to our interpretations of what things mean in the eyes of others. And that's the terrifying beauty of it. Meaning isn't found, it's made, moment by moment, word by word. Every interaction either reinforces who you are or erodes it. Every symbol you accept or reject becomes another brick in the fragile house of your identity. And the people around you, they're building it with you. Labeling theory. Labeling theory is not just an academic idea. It's a weapon, one that can crown you or crush you. It begins the moment someone gives you a name, not your own, but one you never asked for. Troublemaker, lazy, weird, slut, addict. Once that label is spoken, it clings to you. It trails behind like a shadow you can't outrun. And slowly, tragically, you start to become it, not because it's true, but because it's all the world allows you to be. This theory exposes how society doesn't just observe behavior, it brands it. When someone breaks a rule or steps outside the norm, we don't just punish the act, we redefine the person. A child who acts out becomes bad, not misunderstood. A woman who speaks too loudly becomes aggressive, not assertive. And the label sticks, not to the behavior, but to the identity. It shapes how others treat you, how opportunities find you or don't, and most dangerously, how you see yourself. What makes labeling theory so haunting is how it feeds on belief. Once the world believes you're broken, it stops offering repair, and when you believe it too, you stop trying to be whole. It's not the act that ruins lives, it's the name attached to it. But the cruelest twist, the same act by a different person, a richer person, a prettier person, a whiter person, gets a different label. Ambitious, eccentric, just having a rough day. Labels are not truths. They are judgments dressed up as facts. And once you're labeled, escaping it takes more than change. It takes rebellion. Thomas Theorem. The Thomas Theorem slices reality open and shows us something we don't want to admit, that truth is often irrelevant. Perception is everything. This theory declares, if people define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. That one sentence explains wars, racism, love, heartbreak, panic, belief, and even self-destruction. It explains why a rumor can ruin a life, why fear can collapse an economy, why believing you're not good enough keeps you from ever becoming who you could be. The Thomas Theorem pulls the curtain back on how we experience the world. We don't react to what is, we react to what we believe is. If a child believes the dark holds monsters, her body trembles, her heart races. If a man believes he's being watched, he behaves with paranoia, even if no one is there. If a society believes a group is dangerous, it locks them in cages, regardless of the truth. This isn't just theory, it's our daily reality. When someone believes they're ugly, they act with insecurity. When someone believes they're powerful, they radiate it, even if both beliefs are illusions. Our minds don't wait for evidence. We act first, suffer the results, and only afterward realize the foundation was built on fear or fantasy. The consequences are terrifying because they're real, even when the cause is not. That's the heartbreak of the Thomas Theorem. It reminds us that people can destroy themselves over lies they believe too deeply, or rise because they believed in a dream no one else saw. Reality doesn't have to be true to be devastating. It only has to be believed. Looking glass self. The looking glass self is the mirror you can never put down because it's made of other people's eyes. It's the haunting truth that you don't just become who you are, you become who you think others see. Every smirk, every sigh, every glance of approval or rejection doesn't just stay on the surface. It carves into you. It whispers, "This is who you are," and you begin to believe it. According to this theory, your self-image isn't born within you. It's reflected back at you, piece by piece, through social interaction. When you laugh and someone smiles, you think, "I'm funny." When you speak and they look bored, you think, "I'm uninteresting." Over time, you construct your identity not from introspection, but from the responses of others. You become a mosaic of perceptions, some real, some imagined, but all powerful. The tragedy? The mirror lies. People project their pain, their jealousy, their limitations onto you, and you internalize it like gospel. A teacher's impatience becomes, "I'm stupid." A parent's coldness becomes, "I'm unlovable." A classmate's mockery becomes, "I don't belong." These aren't truths. They're reflections warped by someone else's lens, and yet they shape your destiny. We spend our lives polishing this mirror, chasing praise, fearing judgment, because deep down, we believe our worth is decided by how we're seen. But what if the mirror is broken? What if the version of you that lives in others' minds is only a shadow of your truth? The looking glass self doesn't just reveal who you think you are. It reveals how desperately we seek validation in the eyes of a world that's just as unsure of itself. Social identity. Social identity is the invisible costume we wear that tells the world who we are and who we are not. It's the deep psychological bond we form with the groups we belong to, our race, gender, religion, nationality, political tribe, even the music we listen to or the sports team we scream for. It's comforting, empowering, and intoxicating, but it's also divisive, blinding, and dangerously addictive. From childhood, we're taught where we belong. We're told, sometimes without words, you are one of us, and they are not. This us versus them instinct isn't just cultural, it's biological. It makes us feel safe. Being part of a group validates us, gives us pride, and fills the terrifying void of loneliness. But this same force that bonds us can also become a weapon of exclusion, judgment, and hate. Social identity theory explains how people define themselves through their affiliations, and once they do, they begin to inflate the value of their in-group while devaluing others. It's why strangers become brothers at a football game, and why neighbors can become enemies in times of political unrest. We don't just protect the group, we become it. We wear its beliefs like armor, and we attack anyone who threatens it, even if that someone is just asking questions. The scariest part? Once a group gives you identity, it can also take it away. A person rejected by their group feels not just isolated, but erased, because when your identity is borrowed from the outside, losing it feels like losing yourself. Gender performativity. Gender performativity isn't about who you are, it's about what you do to survive in a world obsessed with roles. This theory, brought to life by Judith Butler, shatters the comforting lie that gender is some fixed truth rooted in biology. Instead, it exposes gender as a performance, a relentless act rehearsed and repeated until it feels like reality. You are not born a woman or a man. You are taught how to act like one, and if you don't follow the script, the audience punishes you. From the way you walk to the pitch of your voice, from how you dress to the emotions you're allowed to show, every gesture is judged. Boys are handed toughness, girls are handed softness. Step out of line and you're mocked, shamed, corrected. Gender performativity reveals that our bodies become stages, our clothes become costumes, our words, our silences, all part of the show. And the cruelest part? Most of us don't even know we're acting. We believe the script is who we are. But for those who feel the performance cracking, for those who dare to deviate, it's not just rebellion. It's war. They're called confused, unnatural, wrong, not because they are, but because they break the illusion society clings to for comfort. Performativity means you can't be a gender without doing gender, and it means freedom isn't found in the mirror, it's in the moment you stop performing for someone else's applause. To understand gender performativity is to see the world's rules for what they are, not truth, but theater. And some people are done pretending. Role theory. Role theory reveals a brutal truth we rarely question. Most of us are acting, not because we're fake, but because society handed us a script the moment we were born, and we learned to play the part to survive. Role theory is the idea that much of our behavior is shaped by the expectations tied to the roles we occupy: parent, friend, leader, student, employee, man, woman, victim, hero. These roles come with rules. Some are whispered, some are screamed. All are powerful. We don't just live, we perform. A father learns he must be stoic. A boss believes she must be dominant. A teenager molds his laughter to sound cooler. We aren't just being ourselves, we're being what's expected. And when we fail to meet those expectations, the world reacts with disappointment, judgment, or rejection. So we adapt. We edit ourselves, not because we want to, but because we fear what happens when we don't. Role theory explains why we feel exhausted when we're being someone we're not. It's not just emotional, it's psychological. Constant role switching fractures identity. A woman may feel powerful at work and powerless at home. A man may be vulnerable with friends and guarded with family. Each role demands a version of us that might conflict with the others. But here's what makes this theory gut-wrenching. Sometimes the role becomes the person. The mask fuses to the face. You forget where the performance ends and you begin. And when that happens, You don't just lose touch with others, you lose yourself. Social roles. Social roles are the invisible costumes we wear every day, often without realizing it. They tell us how to stand, how to speak, how to feel. They whisper, act like a mother, behave like a man, smile like a good employee. These roles aren't chosen freely. They're assigned the moment we enter society, and once we wear them long enough, we forget they were ever costumes at all. From birth, society casts us in its play. If you're the oldest sibling, you're expected to lead. If you're a teacher, you're supposed to be composed. If you're grieving, but also a father, you must be strong for everyone else. These roles shape how others treat us and how we treat ourselves. They reward us when we conform and punish us when we deviate. But here's the unsettling truth. Social roles don't always fit. They can feel like cages dressed up as responsibility. The pressure is subtle but suffocating. A woman in a boardroom must soften her voice so she isn't too aggressive. A man in pain must stay silent so he isn't too emotional. A child in school must sit still, even if his mind is loud with ideas. We don't ask if the role is fair or true. We ask how well we can play it. The worst part? When you play a role long enough, people stop seeing you. They see the title, the label, the expectation. And if you try to change, to grow, to step out of the role, they resist, because your performance gave them comfort, and your truth might break the script. Discourse analysis. Discourse analysis is the art of reading between the lines, of dissecting the words, phrases, and narratives that shape how we see the world and each other. It's the unsettling recognition that language is never neutral. Every word chosen, every phrase repeated, every story told or untold carries a hidden weight, a silent agenda. Discourse analysis forces us to confront how power operates, not through violence or laws, but through sentences, slogans, headlines, and whispers. This theory pulls apart the conversations we accept as normal and asks, who benefits from this narrative? Who is silenced by it? It reveals that we don't just describe reality through language, we construct it. When a woman demanding justice is called emotional, or when a protest is labeled a riot, or when poverty is framed as a personal failure instead of systemic neglect, those words don't just inform, they shape thought, emotion, and action. Discourse becomes a tool of control. Governments use it to justify war. Corporations use it to sell self-worth. Families use it to pass down shame. A single sentence, boys don't cry, you're overreacting, just be grateful, can echo for years inside someone's mind, rewriting their sense of self. And perhaps the most terrifying truth, we often don't even realize we're speaking in borrowed voices. We repeat what we've been taught, reinforcing the very systems that have hurt us. Discourse analysis gives us the power to break that spell, to name the spell itself, and to begin speaking truths we were never supposed to know. Power knowledge. Power knowledge is the sinister dance between truth and control, revealed by Michel Foucault in a way that makes your skin crawl once you see it. It tells us that knowledge isn't innocent. It's constructed, curated, and weaponized by those who hold power. And in return, knowledge strengthens that power, making it seem natural, even necessary. What we call truth is often nothing more than the official version of reality, shaped by those with the authority to speak, teach, punish, and erase. In this twisted cycle, power doesn't just dominate through laws or violence. It dominates through what we're taught to believe. It decides what counts as normal, what qualifies as insane, who gets labeled a criminal, what counts as success, and who is allowed to speak without being silenced. This isn't just oppression, it's programming. Hospitals, schools, prisons, governments, they don't just manage bodies, they shape minds. A diagnosis becomes a label. A test score becomes your worth. A history book becomes gospel. And behind it all, power is hiding, smiling, pretending it has nothing to do with what we know. The horror of power knowledge is that it doesn't force us to obey. It convinces us to agree. It teaches us not just what to think, but how to think. And once we accept that lens, we stop questioning it. We self-police. We censor each other. We become enforcers of the very system that controls us. Understanding power knowledge isn't about paranoia. It's about waking up. Because once you realize that truth has never been neutral, you start to wonder what else has been built on silence, fear, and control. Performativity is not about acting, it's about becoming. It's the haunting idea that we don't just express who we are through our actions, we create who we are through them. You are not born a woman, a man, a leader, a failure. You become one by performing the role so often, with such repetition, that it shapes your very identity. And the terrifying twist? You didn't write the script. Society did. Performativity, rooted in the work of Judith Butler, shows us that identity is not a stable truth. It's a constant performance. When a boy learns to walk like a man, when a girl is told to sit like a lady, they're not just learning behaviors, they're being trained into identities. The world hands them costumes, lines, gestures, and tells them to become what's expected. And they do, not because they're pretending, but because the performance makes it real. Every repeated gesture, every word, every facial expression says, "This is who I am," until one day it is. We don't express gender, power, or identity. We construct it through the performance. And like a play, the audience, friends, family, society, watches, reacts, and reinforces the act. Approval becomes applause. Shame becomes a warning. But what happens when the performance breaks? When someone refuses to play the part? That's when the world pushes back. Because if identity is performative, then rebellion is a disruption of reality. It's not just nonconformity, it's danger. Performativity isn't just a theory, it's the invisible choreography of our lives. And once you see it, you can't unsee the stage you're standing on. Normativity is the quiet law of should. It's not written in books or voted into policy, but it governs every room you walk into. It tells you how to act, who to be, what to want. It draws the invisible lines between normal and deviant, acceptable and wrong, and dares you to step outside them. You don't notice normativity until you violate it, and when you do, the backlash is swift, cold, and punishing. It starts early. Boys don't cry. Girls sit still. Success looks like this. Love looks like that. Normativity teaches us not just to obey, but to internalize the obedience, to silence the question before it forms, to feel shame for simply being different. It's not enforced with violence. It's enforced with whispers, side eyes, exclusions, promotions denied, dates that never happen, smiles that tighten just slightly. The terror of normativity is that it creates a world where fitting in feels like survival. So we perform. We straighten our backs, our voices, our dreams. We erase what's too loud, too soft, too queer, too broken, too much. We learn to hurt ourselves gently in ways that look like self-control, and the world applauds. Normativity doesn't just regulate behavior, it defines reality. If a family doesn't fit the mold, it's labeled broken. If a body doesn't conform, it's marked for fixing. If a love doesn't align, it's called unnatural. These aren't neutral terms. They're moral judgments masked as common sense, and the weight they carry can crush a person's truth into silence. What makes normativity so dangerous is that it hides behind comfort, behind the familiar. But what it protects is not safety, it's control. Institutionalization. Institutionalization is the slow, almost imperceptible process by which human decisions harden into systems and systems harden into chains. What begins as a simple idea, a rule, a policy, a way of doing things, over time becomes sacred, unquestionable, automatic. It seeps into our schools, hospitals, prisons, workplaces, and families until it no longer feels like a choice. It feels like the way things have to be. This theory shows how society takes a practice and repeats it until it becomes a structure, then guards that structure like it's law. You don't question the 9-to-5 job. You don't question the grading system. You don't question why some people die in prison for crimes others walk away from. Because these systems are institutionalized, they've become reality, not because they're fair or effective, but because they've existed long enough to become invisible. But beneath the surface, institutionalization is profoundly emotional. It traps people. It traps you. It tells the mental patient that they are only their diagnosis. It tells the prisoner that the bars are their home now. It tells the worker that exhaustion is just being productive. It numbs resistance by calling obedience normal. And the longer someone lives within the institution, the harder it becomes to imagine life outside of it. This isn't just about buildings or rules, it's about belief. The belief that we can't change things because that's how it's always been, but always is a lie. Someone built the system, and someone else can tear it down. The tragedy is how few people ever dare to try. Habitus is the invisible script that guides your every move, every choice, every reaction, without you even knowing it exists. Introduced by Pierre Bourdieu, it is not a rule book you read, it's a rule book you become. Habitus is the deeply embedded habits, beliefs, behaviors, and perceptions you inherit from your upbringing, your class, your culture. It's the way you sit, speak, laugh, desire, and dream, all shaped before you ever had a chance to choose. You think you're deciding freely, but habitus whispers in your ear, telling you what is appropriate, what is possible, what is out of reach. It's why someone born in poverty may hesitate to walk into a luxury store, not because there's a sign stopping them, but because something inside whispers, you don't belong here. It's why a child raised in a home full of books speaks differently than one raised in survival mode. It's not intelligence, it's habitus. It's inherited memory living in the body. Habitus is carved into you by repetition, soaked in from your family, your neighborhood, your school, your church, your fears. It dictates how you respond to success, failure, love, conflict. It decides if you look someone in the eyes or lower your gaze. It's why someone can feel shame without being shamed, why someone can feel confident without earning it. And the most haunting part? It hides under the illusion of just who I am. But it's not. It's who the world trained you to be before you ever knew you had a choice. Habitus isn't fate, but it's damn close until you see it, and then maybe you can rewrite it. Field theory. Field theory is the invisible map of power, possibility, and pressure that surrounds every human life. Born from the mind of Pierre Bourdieu, it reveals that society isn't just a structure, it's a battlefield of overlapping fields where people compete for status, influence, and meaning. Each field, whether it's art, politics, education, religion, or fashion, has its own rules, hierarchies, and values. And the moment you enter one, whether you realize it or not, you're playing a game someone else designed. Field theory shows that you're never neutral. You carry your past, your background, your upbringing into each field like invisible luggage. That's your habitus, the deep-seated patterns, instincts, and expectations shaped by your environment. And within each field, you exchange forms of capital, not just money, but social connections, cultural knowledge, reputation, or even how you speak and carry yourself. Some are born with the right capital, most are not. This theory crushes the myth of pure merit. It explains why talent alone isn't enough, why some voices are ignored while others are amplified, why certain people rise without trying while others are locked in place no matter how hard they work. The field rewards what it already values and punishes what threatens its balance. What makes field theory so devastatingly real is that the rules are rarely spoken aloud. You fail not because you're incapable, but because you didn't know the game. And by the time you realize you're playing it, you've already lost years trying to win by rules that never applied to you. Capital, social, cultural, symbolic. Capital isn't just about money, it's about power disguised as belonging. Social, cultural, and symbolic capital are the invisible currencies that decide who gets heard, who gets seen, and who gets left behind. They don't sit in bank accounts, but in connections, manners, accents, and reputations. You can't touch them, but they can open doors or slam them shut in your face. Social capital is who you know. It's the handshakes in boardrooms, the backdoor favors, the phone calls made when rules don't apply. It's the difference between a second chance and being forgotten. Cultural capital is what you know: how to dress at a gala, how to quote the right authors, how to navigate a world built for the elite. It's knowing which fork to use and which books to mention in a job interview. And symbolic capital? That's the magic trick. It's the honor, the prestige, the aura of legitimacy that makes others trust you before you speak. It's the uniform, the title, the Ivy League degree, none of which speak for your worth, but all of which the world believes. If you lack these forms of capital, you feel it in the silence, the awkward pause, the patronizing tone. You're not just excluded, you're made to feel like you never belonged. But those who have capital don't notice it. To them, it feels natural, deserved, invisible. And that's the cruelty of it. Capital pretends to be earned when it's inherited, absorbed, gifted through access and upbringing. And those without it, they're told to try harder in a game that's already rigged. Cultural scripts. Cultural scripts are the invisible instructions we're handed at birth, etched into us before we even understand language. They tell us how to feel, how to behave, how to love, how to suffer. They whisper when we're allowed to cry, who we're allowed to be, what dreams are too big, and what silence must be swallowed. These scripts don't scream. They murmur. They wrap around us like tradition, like identity, like home. And that's what makes them dangerous. Every culture writes its own version. In one, obedience is noble. In another, ambition is sacred. In some, women must shrink. In others, men must never bleed. These scripts don't ask your permission. They shape your instincts. A boy is told, real men don't cry. A girl hears, be pretty, not loud. A victim is told, it's your fault for not being careful. And they carry those lines like gospel, never realizing they're reciting someone else's words. Cultural scripts don't just live in households. They pulse through classrooms, courtrooms, movies, social media. They define what's normal, what's success, what's enough. And if you break the script, if you live differently, love differently, speak differently, you don't just risk judgment. You risk exile, because you've stepped out of the story everyone else has agreed to follow. What makes this so quietly heartbreaking is that most people never realize they're acting. They think the role is real. They think the lines are theirs. But beneath every script is a choice that was made by someone else long ago. And the only way to reclaim your voice is to stop playing the part. Social norms. Social norms are the quiet enforcers of conformity, the unspoken rules that sculpt our behavior, not through law, but through fear of rejection. They don't scream, they whisper. You feel them when you dress for a job interview, when you laugh at a joke you didn't find funny, when you stay silent even though your soul is screaming. Social norms don't need to be written down. They are embedded in glances, raised eyebrows, awkward silences, and the terrifying power of what will they think. From the moment we open our eyes to the world, we are bombarded with messages about how to act, speak, think, even feel. Girls are told to sit nicely. Boys are told not to cry. We learn when it's okay to speak and when it's better to bite our tongues. We don't question it. We absorb it, internalize it, obey it. Because disobedience doesn't just make you different, it makes you vulnerable. It makes you alone. Social norms are why we wear black to funerals and white to weddings. why we nod in meetings even when we disagree, why we smile when we're breaking inside. They create an invisible fence between acceptable and unacceptable. Step outside of it, and you feel it instantly. The judgment, the distancing, the punishment. But here's the truth they don't want you to know. Social norms are not eternal. They are fragile, invented, and constantly evolving. What was shameful yesterday becomes revolutionary today. What's normal today might be condemned tomorrow. The world can shift, but only if someone's brave enough to disobey the script first. Stigma. Stigma is the silent scar that society brands onto people it fears, misunderstands, or wants to erase. It's not just judgment, it's exile. It takes a single trait, behavior, or identity and turns it into a curse. Mental illness, addiction, poverty, disability, race, queerness. These aren't just realities people live with. When filtered through stigma, they become reasons to devalue someone's entire existence. And once marked, you are no longer seen as a person. You are reduced to your difference. Irving Goffman's theory of stigma reveals the brutal way society decides who is worthy of dignity and who is not. A scar on the skin becomes a scar on the soul. The moment you are labeled less than, everything changes. Eyes look away, doors close, opportunities vanish. You become hyper-aware of yourself, your voice, your body, your every word, because you know you're being watched, judged, measured against a standard you never chose. What makes stigma so cruel is that it doesn't just live on the outside. Over time, it moves inward. You start to believe the whispers. You shrink to fit the shame. You hide your truth, not because it's wrong, but because it's dangerous. People stigmatized are not only rejected, they are blamed for their own pain. You chose this. You brought it on yourself. Stigma transforms suffering into a spectacle and invisibility into survival. And yet, those who carry stigma carry a truth society cannot bear to face, that normal is a myth and that shame is a weapon wielded by the fearful. Stigma silences, but only if you let it. Ethnomethodology. Ethnomethodology is the study of the ordinary, so ordinary it's terrifying. It's the invisible web of understandings, unspoken rules, and tiny rituals that hold society together, thread by fragile thread. It doesn't ask what we do. It asks how we know how to do anything at all. How do we know when a conversation starts, when it ends? How do we know what's a joke, what's an insult, what's flirting, or what's a threat? The answer, we don't know, we just do. This theory reveals that daily life is not stable. It's constantly being constructed, second by second, through shared assumptions. It's the quiet choreography of existence. When you enter an elevator and face forward, when you greet a stranger with a nod, when you lower your voice in a library, you're not following laws. You're following invisible expectations you've never questioned. Ethnomethodology pulls back the curtain and says, those rules you follow, they aren't real. They're negotiated, maintained through mutual trust, and if one person breaks them, even slightly, the entire interaction fractures. Someone stands the wrong way in an elevator, and suddenly, everyone feels tense. No one taught us this rule, but we all feel the breach. That's the haunting beauty of ethnomethodology. It shows how fragile normal is. It exists only because we all silently agree to act as if it does. If even a few people stop playing the game, reality bends, cracks, or collapses. And suddenly, the world feels strange, not because it changed, but because someone stopped pretending. Ethnomethodology reminds us that life is theater, and we are all its secret playwrights. Frame analysis. Frame analysis is the unseen hand that shapes how we understand everything, from a stranger's glance to a national tragedy. It's the lens we don't realize we're looking through, the context we don't know we're obeying. This theory reveals a brutal truth. People don't react to facts. They react to how those facts are framed, and the frame can turn a protest into a riot, a hero into a threat, a victim into a suspect, without ever changing the story itself. We use frames constantly, subconsciously. A job loss is framed as failure or a fresh start. A crying child is framed as spoiled or overwhelmed. A woman who speaks up is framed as bossy or brave, depending on the script people already believe. These frames aren't neutral. They are loaded with bias, soaked in power, and often crafted by those who benefit most from your misperception. What's terrifying is how quickly a frame can become your reality. When someone frames you as unstable, every emotion you show becomes evidence. When the media frames a group as dangerous, their pain becomes suspicious. Frame analysis shows us that the truth doesn't always survive interpretation, and that the way something is presented can matter more than what it actually is. And in personal life, you frame yourself too. You tell yourself you're not enough, too sensitive, a failure, and live accordingly. But maybe the issue isn't who you are. Maybe it's the frame you've been trapped in, because once a story is framed, people stop questioning it. They just accept it and act. Reality maintenance. Reality maintenance is the fragile illusion we all agree to protect. It's the silent pact we make to keep the world predictable, even if it means denying our own truths. Every morning we wake up and step into a reality that's been carefully constructed by history, by language, by culture, and we perform it as if it were unshakable fact. But behind every job title, every handshake, every institution lies a simple truth. It's all made up, and it only exists because we keep pretending it's real. We don't like to admit that. It's terrifying. So we defend the illusion. When someone questions their role in society, when someone challenges a tradition, when someone breaks from what's normal, we don't just resist them. We protect the reality they threaten to unravel. That's what makes reality maintenance so powerful. It's not about truth. It's about stability. This is why whistleblowers are exiled, why trauma is silenced, why survivors are doubted, because their pain doesn't fit into the script the rest of us are clinging to. We want to believe the system works, that parents always protect, that justice is blind, that hard work pays off. When reality cracks, we patch it, not with honesty, but with denial. And so, we maintain the lie. We call abuse a misunderstanding. We call discrimination just how things are. We call oppression the natural order. We do this not because we're evil, but because we're afraid. Afraid that if one thread unravels, the whole world might collapse. But sometimes, collapse is the only way to build something real. Moral panic. Moral panic is mass hysteria with a villain. It's the moment society collectively loses its grip on reason, convinced that some group, trend, or idea is not just wrong, but dangerous, corrupting, evil. It starts with a whisper. A teenager listens to the wrong music, wears the wrong clothes, joins the wrong crowd. Then it grows, fueled by headlines, political speeches, and terrified parents, until it becomes a wildfire of fear, blame, and righteous fury. This isn't just about being afraid, it's about needing someone to blame, a scapegoat, a monster. And when the panic hits, facts don't matter. Evidence becomes irrelevant. What matters is emotion, the need to feel safe, the desire to protect something sacred, the desperate urge to believe we're on the right side. So we demonize, we exaggerate, we punish. In every era, there's a target. The witches, the immigrants, the queers, the youth, the violent video games, the toxic subcultures. Society picks a group, paints them as a threat to morality, and launches a crusade. And when it's all over, when the panic dies and reason returns, what's left behind is the wreckage, lives destroyed, reputations ruined, policies passed in fear. Moral panic doesn't need truth. It needs outrage. It spreads faster than fire because it feeds on a primal fear. that the world we know is slipping away. But here's the dark truth. The panic isn't about protecting society. It's about preserving power. And the ones who scream the loudest are often the ones with the most to lose. Hegemony. Hegemony is power that doesn't need to shout because it's already inside your head. It's the soft, seductive control that convinces you that the way things are is the way they should be. You don't see it, you live it. Hegemony isn't enforced by violence or threat. It's maintained through culture, media, language, education. It makes dominance look like common sense. It makes inequality feel natural. This theory reveals how those in power stay in power, not just through laws or money, but by shaping our beliefs. They don't just control what we do, they control what we think is possible. You don't question your boss's authority because you believe in hierarchy. You don't question beauty standards because you think they're universal. You chase success, status, and perfection, not because you want to, but because you've been taught that you must. Hegemony whispers through textbooks, headlines, films, and fashion. It tells women to be small, men to be hard, workers to be grateful, and rebels to be ashamed. It makes privilege invisible and struggle feel like personal failure. It doesn't need to punish you, it gets you to punish yourself. And the most terrifying part? It makes you defend it. When someone questions the system, you feel uncomfortable. You call them dramatic, unrealistic, ungrateful, because deep down, you've tied your identity to a structure that doesn't serve you, but gave you just enough to keep you quiet. Hegemony is not brute force. It's consent, engineered, rehearsed, inhaled. It doesn't lock the doors. It convinces you not to leave. Post-structuralism. Post-structuralism is the intellectual earthquake that rattles the foundation of everything you think is certain. It doesn't just challenge truth. It dismantles the very idea that truth can be fixed, stable, or universal. It looks at language, identity, morality, power, and whispers. None of this is as solid as you believe. What we call meaning isn't natural. It's constructed, it's shifting, it's layered with contradictions. And the moment we try to pin it down, it slips away. This theory exposes how everything we use to understand the world, words, categories, identities, is soaked in history, culture, and power. You think you're a man, a woman, a citizen, a criminal? Post-structuralism asks, who gave those words meaning? Who benefits from that meaning? It tears the mask off language and shows it as a tool, used not just to describe the world, but to control it. There's no one narrative here, no final truth, no master key to unlock reality. Post-structuralism insists that every system, every belief, every label contains contradictions and blind spots. And when we act like those systems are perfect, we silence the messy, painful, inconvenient truths that don't fit. It's disorienting, it's liberating, it's terrifying, because once you realize meaning is fluid, the world becomes harder to navigate, but also infinitely more honest. You begin to see how identities are performed, how rules are negotiated, how power hides inside common sense. Post-structuralism doesn't give answers, it gives questions, dangerous ones, the kind that can unravel everything, the kind that dare you to think without a script. Constructivist epistemology. Constructivist epistemology is the unsettling idea that truth isn't discovered, it's built. It tells us that knowledge isn't found under microscopes or dug out of ancient soil, waiting patiently to be unveiled. Instead, it's assembled, brick by brick, through human experience, language, belief, and interaction. What we call truth is not a mirror of reality, but a reflection of the minds and cultures that shaped it. This theory doesn't just challenge how we learn, it challenges what we think can be known. It suggests that everything we know is filtered through our senses, our upbringing, our biases, that every fact is tangled in context, that there is no such thing as raw, pure knowledge, only interpretations, stories, frameworks, and that's a terrifying realization because if knowledge is constructed, then so are the walls we've built around it. The gatekeeping of academia, the worship of experts, the idea that some people are more objective than others. Constructivist epistemology is a rebellion against the myth of neutrality. It forces us to confront how race, gender, language, power, and emotion all shape what counts as knowledge in the first place. It asks, who decided what truth looks like? Who gets to speak it? Who gets to question it without being silenced? This is why marginalized voices are so often dismissed, not because they lack intelligence, but because they threaten the foundations of a reality someone else constructed. In this view, truth isn't something you find, it's something you make. And every time you speak your lived experience, you aren't just telling your story. You're building a new kind of knowledge, one that didn't exist until you dared to name it. Interpretivism. Interpretivism is the quiet rebellion against cold, mechanical truths. It doesn't ask, what is the fact? It asks, what does it mean to you? This theory refuses to see people as numbers or cases. It sees them as living stories, breathing contradictions shaped by emotion, culture, memory, and experience. In a world obsessed with measurement and objectivity, interpretivism dares to say human reality is not a lab experiment, it's a conversation. This perspective understands that two people can experience the same moment and walk away with entirely different truths, and both can be valid. A funeral may be healing for one and traumatizing for another. A kiss may be romance for one and manipulation for another. Interpretivism doesn't flatten that complexity, it embraces it. It tells us that meaning is never fixed. It's fluid, deeply personal, and born from interaction. But the power of interpretivism isn't just academic, it's emotional. It validates the gut feeling that something is off, even when the data says otherwise. It honors voices that are often dismissed, the grieving, the marginalized, the misread. It whispers that your story matters, even if it doesn't fit the template. Interpretivism demands empathy. To understand someone, you must enter their world, not reduce them to symptoms or stereotypes. You must listen without trying to solve, witness without trying to explain, because sometimes the most honest truths aren't found in charts or graphs. They're found in a trembling voice, a broken sentence, a glance that carries the weight of an untold life. In the end, interpretivism teaches us something terrifying and beautiful. Reality isn't something we find, it's something we interpret together. Social facts. Social facts are the ghosts that govern us, unseen, unchosen, but unbearably real. They are the invisible rules etched into the walls of society, shaping how we love, grieve, marry, worship, and die. You don't vote for them. You don't invent them. You inherit them. They are born from collective life, and yet they control individual behavior with terrifying power. Emile Durkheim called them ways of acting, thinking, and feeling external to the individual and endowed with a power of coercion. That's the soul of a social fact. It exists outside of you, but moves through you. You feel it when you walk into a funeral and instinctively lower your voice, when you shake hands in greeting, when you stand for a national anthem, not because you believe, but because you're expected to. These acts feel personal, but they're not. They're collective agreements you've absorbed so deeply, you forget they were ever taught. Social facts punish without words. Break them, and you'll feel it instantly, in the stares, the silence, the tightening of space around you. A man crying in public, a woman refusing motherhood, a child questioning religion. These aren't just choices, they're violations of what society has silently decreed as normal. And that's what makes social facts so haunting. They don't ask for your permission. They don't care about your truth. They shape your reality whether you agree or not. They survive not because they are right, but because we are afraid to live without them. Social facts are not facts because they are true. They are facts because we act like they are. Cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is the unsettling reminder that your truth is not the truth. It's just a truth. It challenges the deep-rooted instinct to believe that your way of living, thinking, and believing is somehow superior or more correct than someone else's. It says, stop measuring the world by your own ruler. What seems barbaric to one culture might be sacred to another. What looks like oppression to you might feel like identity to someone else. Cultural relativism asks you to pause before you judge, and that pause can feel like betrayal. It's not comfortable. It forces you to look at practices, beliefs, even values that clash with everything you were taught. And instead of rejecting them, it asks you to understand them. That doesn't mean agreeing. It means recognizing that every culture is built from its own history, trauma, survival, and meaning. Your customs? They're not natural. They're learned. Your morals? They're shaped by stories someone else wrote. Cultural relativism strips away the illusion of moral superiority. It forces you to see that calling something primitive or wrong is often just a reflection of fear or ignorance. And that is a hard pill to swallow, especially when our identities are so tightly woven into our sense of what's right. But here's the haunting truth. Without cultural relativism, empathy dies. We reduce people to caricatures, customs to crimes, difference to danger. This theory doesn't promise clarity. It promises discomfort, the kind that makes space for compassion, because sometimes the most radical thing you can do isn't to change someone else's world. It's to accept that it was never yours to define. Social deviance. Social deviance is the scarlet letter society stitches onto your back the moment you step outside its unwritten rules. It's not about being wrong. It's about being different, about daring to be what the world says you shouldn't be. Deviance isn't defined by laws or facts. It's defined by discomfort. It's how a girl who speaks too boldly becomes obnoxious, how a boy who wears makeup becomes confused, how a person who refuses silence becomes a threat. At its core, social deviance reveals the brutal truth that normal is a moving target, decided not by what is right, but by what is accepted, and what's accepted is controlled by those with power. What makes you deviant isn't your actions, it's the gaze of others. A white man yelling in public is passionate. A black man doing the same is dangerous. Same behavior, different frame. Social deviance is not about morality. It's about whose behavior gets forgiven and whose gets punished. But here's the twist. Deviance is not failure. It's rebellion. It's survival. It's the body refusing to shrink, the voice refusing to tremble, the identity refusing to vanish. Deviance is what births movements, art, truth. Every revolution began as deviance. Every freedom once broke the rules. And yet, the label cuts deep. Once you're marked as deviant, your humanity is questioned. You're watched, judged, feared. Even if you've harmed no one, your mere existence is seen as provocation. That's the heartbreak of social deviance. It doesn't punish cruelty. It punishes courage. It tells you that being yourself is wrong, and then dares you to survive anyway. Intersectionality. Intersectionality is the truth that pain doesn't exist in neat little boxes. It's the scream beneath the surface when someone says, "It's not that bad." It's the ache of being unseen, unheard, and misread, because the world only knows how to look at one part of you at a time. Intersectionality exposes the brutal reality that identities don't stack. They collide, they entangle, they multiply both privilege and oppression in ways too complex for simple narratives. Coined not as theory, but as survival, intersectionality was born from the voices of Black women who were being crushed under systems that said, "We see your gender," or "We see your race," but never both. A Black woman denied a job isn't just facing racism or sexism. She's facing something else entirely, something unique, something invisible in systems built to recognize only one layer of struggle at a time. Imagine standing at the crossroads of race, gender, class, disability, queerness. Each road is a pressure. Each direction carries expectations, threats, rules. If you move one way, you're too much. If you move another, you're not enough. And when society doesn't know how to process all of you, it erases the parts it can't categorize. You don't just feel marginalized, you feel fragmented. Intersectionality isn't a buzzword, it's a mirror. It demands that we see the full picture, that we stop flattening people into single-issue identities. Because when someone suffers at the crossroads, it's not because of who they are, but because of how society refuses to see how all those parts come together. And the cost of that blindness is real. It's violence in silence. It's trauma in policy. It's injustice with a smile. Queer theory. Queer theory is not just a framework. It's a rebellion. It tears through the rigid walls of identity, gender, and sexuality, not to erase them, but to expose how fragile and performative they really are. It asks the questions no one wants to face. Who told you what it means to be a man? Why is straight seen as the default? Why must love, desire, and identity be boxed, named, and judged? At its core, queer theory dismantles the idea that there is a normal. It challenges the myth that identities are fixed, that gender is binary, that sexuality is stable. It reveals that these things are constructed, taught, enforced, policed, not discovered. You were not born into truth. You were born into roles, rules, expectations, and queer theory calls them out unapologetically. It's not just about being gay or trans or non-conforming. It's about resisting the suffocating pressure to be anything just to make others comfortable. Queer theory shines a burning light on how systems reward conformity and punish difference. It shows how language traps us, how labels become cages, and how even pride can be commodified if we're not vigilant. Queer theory is messy. It's disruptive. It's beautifully, intentionally chaotic. Because real liberation doesn't come from fitting into new boxes. It comes from smashing them all together. It doesn't just ask for inclusion. It demands transformation. And for many, it's the first time they hear the words, "You don't have to perform to be valid. You don't have to explain to be real." Queer theory doesn't just challenge the system. It dares you to unlearn the parts of yourself that were never truly yours. Critical race theory. Critical race theory is not just a lens, it's a revelation. It peels back the surface of society and exposes the wounds we've learned to ignore. It tells us that racism isn't always about hatred, it's about structure. It's not just about slurs or extremists. It's about policies, institutions, and everyday decisions that silently privilege one group while suffocating another. This theory demands that we stop looking for racism only in individual hearts and start seeing it in systems, in schools that fail Black children, in banks that deny loans to brown neighborhoods, in laws that punish skin color more harshly than crime. It forces us to see what society desperately wants to keep hidden, that neutrality is often just disguised inequality, that pretending we're colorblind doesn't erase racism, it reinforces it. Critical race theory is confrontational because the truth always is. It asks, who built these systems? Who benefits from them? And who pays the price? It pulls no punches because silence is complicity. It shows how history isn't past, it's present. Slavery echoes in prisons, colonization lives on in stolen land, segregation reincarnates in housing and healthcare. What terrifies people most about critical race theory is that it makes injustice visible, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. It exposes the lie of meritocracy. It reveals how whiteness operates not just as identity, but as currency, and it tells those who've been silenced for generations, your pain is real, your story matters, and this system was never neutral. Critical race theory isn't an attack, it's a mirror. The question is whether we're brave enough to look into it. Whiteness. Whiteness is not just a skin color, it's a system, a worldview, a position of power so normalized, so embedded, that it becomes invisible to those who benefit from it. It's the silent baseline by which everything else is measured. Whiteness defines what's professional, what's beautiful, what's intelligent, what's safe. It's the lens through which media is written, history is taught, laws are enforced, and success is defined. To understand whiteness is to recognize that it is not an identity, it is a construct. It was built to divide, created to dominate, maintained through silence. It functions by erasing itself, by pretending it's just neutral or standard. When whiteness is present, it doesn't name itself. But when blackness, brownness, indigeneity enter the room, they are labeled, policed, exoticized, feared. Whiteness is why a black child holding a toy gun is seen as a threat, why a white teen with a real one is seen as troubled. It's why resumes with ethnic names get fewer callbacks, why accents are mocked unless they come from Europe, why people of color are asked, "Where are you really from?" while whiteness never has to explain itself. The power of whiteness lies in its ability to center itself without ever being named. It creates norms, then calls them universal. It writes rules, then punishes others for not knowing them. And the cruelest trick? It convinces white people that naming whiteness is an attack rather than a reckoning. Whiteness protects itself by pretending it doesn't exist, and until it's seen, spoken, and dismantled, it will continue to shape the world in its image while calling that image just the way things are. Racial formation. Racial formation is the unsettling truth that race is not a fact of nature. It's a story we've been taught to believe. It's not written in our DNA. It's written in our laws, our history books, our neighborhoods, and our fears. Racial formation theory reveals how race is constantly being created, reshaped, and weaponized, not by biology, but by power. And it explains why something so fragile can feel so brutally permanent. From the moment you're born, the world begins assigning you meaning based on your skin, your name, your accent. It tells you where you belong, who you are, and who you are not. But this isn't random. It's constructed, legislated, performed. It's why Irish and Italian immigrants weren't considered white a century ago. It's why the one-drop rule once defined blackness. It's why racial categories shift depending on who's in control, because race isn't real, but the consequences are. Racial formation happens through institutions, the media, and everyday language. A child hears that certain neighborhoods are bad. A hiring manager just doesn't feel the fit. A headline describes a white shooter as troubled and a black victim as no angel. These aren't accidents, they're formations. They build a reality where whiteness is invisible and everything else is other. And once formed, these ideas are policed. If you don't act like the version of your race the world expects, you're accused of not being authentic. You're questioned, doubted, dismissed. Racial formation isn't about skin. It's about narrative, about control, about whose identity gets to be fluid and whose must carry the burden of proof. Othering is the quiet cruelty of turning someone into a stranger in their own skin. It's the process of defining us by inventing a them, a line drawn not to describe difference, but to dehumanize it. It begins with a glance, a word, a story that paints someone as less familiar, less worthy, less human. And once that seed is planted, the world grows around it. Systems, fears, laws, jokes, violence. To other someone is to strip away their complexity and replace it with a label: foreigner, criminal, alien, freak. You don't have to know them. You just have to believe they are not you. And in that belief lies permission. Permission to fear, to hate, to dominate, to erase. It doesn't always look like rage. Sometimes it's polite. A job never offered. A smile that tightens. A neighborhood where they're told they don't fit. Othering is seductive because it makes us feel safer, superior, normal. It builds belonging by constructing exclusion, but the cost is devastating, not just for the ones pushed out, but for the ones doing the pushing, because the more we divide, the more we shrink our capacity for empathy, for love, for truth. And once someone is othered, their pain becomes optional, their voice becomes noise, their existence becomes negotiable. That is the horror of othering. It's not just social, it's spiritual. It convinces us that some lives are worth less, and that lie becomes law, becomes history, becomes identity. Othering doesn't start with violence. It starts with silence, with not noticing, with looking away. And in that silence, a person becomes a category, a life becomes a stereotype, and humanity is lost. Social labeling. Social labeling is the branding iron society uses on the soul. It isn't about what you do, it's about what you're called. And once a label sticks, it burns. Failure, crazy, slut, thug. These words are not mere descriptions. They are judgments, weapons, destinies written in ink you didn't choose. They follow you into rooms before you arrive and stay long after you've tried to change. This theory reveals the brutal truth. Once someone is labeled, that label becomes their reality. Not because it's accurate, but because it shapes how others treat them, and eventually how they treat themselves. A teenager gets caught stealing and is branded a criminal. No one asks why. No one sees the hunger, the fear, the broken home. The label reduces a whole life into one word, and society responds not with compassion, but punishment. Worse, labeled individuals often begin to embody the role they've been assigned. A girl labeled easy might give up on being respected. A boy labeled stupid might stop trying to prove otherwise. These are not choices. They are responses to a world that has already decided who they are. Social labeling destroys nuance. It flattens identity. It turns humans into stereotypes and complexity into caricature. It makes redemption impossible because every action is interpreted through a poisoned lens. Even kindness becomes suspicious. Even change becomes fake. And the terrifying part? Labels don't need to be true to ruin a life. They just need to be believed by others first, and eventually by the person themselves. Collective memory. Collective memory is the past that lives in our present, not through facts, but through feelings, stories, silences, and scars. It's the memory we inherit, not through blood, but through belonging. It shapes how a nation mourns, how a community celebrates, how a people define themselves against the world. It's not stored in textbooks. It's passed in whispers, monuments, rituals, movies, news, and wounds that never fully close. This theory reveals that memory isn't just individual, it's social. What we choose to remember together becomes part of who we are. But more hauntingly, what we choose to forget defines us just as much. A country that erases its crimes becomes proud without compassion. A community that remembers its suffering can unite through pain or be trapped in it. Memory here is not truth, it's power. Collective memory decides which histories get a museum and which get a mass grave, which stories get holidays and which are left untold. It explains why a flag can mean freedom to one person and terror to another, why one statue inspires pride and another rage. It's not the past that divides us. It's the memory of the past, curated by generations who needed heroes and enemies. And in this way, collective memory is always a battlefield between what happened and what we say happened, between those who demand remembrance and those who beg to forget, between silence and survival. We don't just carry memory, we perform it. And in that performance, we pass on a truth or a lie. Either way, it becomes real. Socialization. Socialization is the silent sculptor of the soul. It begins before you can speak, shaping the way you walk, talk, feel, and dream, long before you realize you ever had a choice. It's the process by which society trains you to become one of us, not through force, but through whispers, habits, rewards, and shame. It doesn't just teach you how to behave, it teaches you what to believe, what to want, and what parts of yourself to bury. From the moment you're born, the world begins its work. Your colors are chosen, your toys are labeled, your emotions are ranked. Some are praised, others punished. If you're a girl, you're told to be sweet, quiet, helpful. If you're a boy, you're told to be tough, loud, unyielding. These lessons aren't taught in school. They're absorbed in glances, gestures, bedtime stories, and silent expectations. And you don't just learn who you're supposed to be, you learn what's dangerous to be. You learn to hide your sadness, your softness, your questions. You learn that love has rules, that success has a shape, that power has a voice, and it doesn't sound like yours. Socialization is how culture survives, but also how trauma repeats. It's why racism, sexism, homophobia, and classism keep breathing, generation after generation, because it's not just institutions that teach us, it's family, media, friends, strangers on the street. You're molded not for your truth, but for your role. And when you finally wake up and try to unlearn it, it feels like betrayal. But the real betrayal is never questioning who you were told to be. Identity politics. Identity politics is not about division, it's about survival. It emerges from the wound of being erased, ignored, silenced for too long. It's the voice of those who were told, "You don't matter here," who now rise to say, "We always did." At its heart, identity politics is a refusal to separate lived experience from political power. It says, who you are, what you've endured, the way you walk through this world. It's not just personal, it's political. When Black people demand justice, when queer people demand visibility, when women demand autonomy, it's not about special treatment. It's about finally being seen in systems designed to overlook, diminish, and control them. Identity politics doesn't fragment society. It reveals that society was already fractured. It doesn't create conflict. It unmasks it. Critics say it's divisive, but what they really mean is it's uncomfortable. Because identity politics asks the uncomfortable questions. Who holds the power? Who writes the rules? Who gets to speak without being interrupted? Who gets to survive without explanation? It gives voice to those who were always spoken about, but never spoken with. It says your truth, your body, your name, they matter in this conversation. And that threatens those who benefit from silence, those who've never had to question if the world was built for them, because it was. Identity politics is not a plea for pity. It's a demand for justice. It's what happens when people realize that dignity won't be handed down. It must be claimed, loudly, publicly, unapologetically, because to exist in a world that erases you and to still speak is the most political act of all. Ideology. Ideology is the voice in your head that doesn't sound like yours, but feels like truth. It's the hidden script running your life, whispering what's right, what's wrong, what's real, what's ridiculous. You don't remember choosing it. That's because you didn't. It was handed to you through media, family, school, religion, drip by drip, until it's soaked into your bones. And now you see the world through its lens without ever realizing you're wearing glasses. Ideology isn't just a belief system. It's a structure of meaning. It tells you what matters and what doesn't. It defines success as wealth, beauty as thinness, masculinity as dominance, femininity as submission. It frames poverty as laziness, power as competence, and suffering as personal failure. It shapes how you interpret everything: news, identity, justice, love, and it's so effective because it doesn't ask questions. It answers them before you ever knew to ask. What makes ideology so dangerous is its invisibility. It doesn't announce itself, it embeds itself. It's the reason you flinch when someone breaks a norm. It's why you doubt your worth if you don't measure up. It's why you cheer for some and condemn others without knowing why. Ideology controls not just what you think, but what you can think. And when challenged, ideology fights back. You feel anger, discomfort, defensiveness, not because someone attacked you, but because they threatened the story you didn't realize you were living inside. Ideology is not about truth. It's about power disguised as truth. And until you see it, it owns you. Cultural hegemony. Cultural hegemony is the quiet conquest of the mind. It's not won through war or weapons, but through stories, songs, brands, films, fashion, and faith. It's the domination that doesn't feel like domination at all because it comes wrapped in comfort, beauty, and the illusion of choice. You don't resist it because you've already internalized it. You see it in advertisements that tell you what happiness looks like, in school books that praise the victors, in movies where the hero always speaks the dominant language, wears the dominant skin, loves in the dominant way. Coined by Antonio Gramsci, cultural hegemony explains how the ruling class maintains power not by force, but by shaping culture itself, by convincing everyone that their worldview is not just a way of living, but the way. It's the reason people chase job titles over fulfillment, buy luxury over necessity, and shame themselves for not fitting into molds they never agreed to in the first place. The terrifying part is how subtle it is. Cultural hegemony doesn't scream, it seduces. It doesn't outlaw your identity. It makes you ashamed of it. It teaches you to laugh at your accent, to straighten your hair, to hide your roots, to fear being too loud, too dark, too foreign. You start to censor your own soul just to belong. And when an alternative vision dares to rise, when marginalized voices speak truth, when cultures reclaim pride, when movements challenge the norm, cultural hegemony mocks them, dilutes them, or sells them back as trends. Not to liberate, but to contain, because the most efficient kind of control is the kind you don't recognize. Subjectivity. Subjectivity is the raw, aching truth that there is no universal reality, only personal ones. It's the realization that everything you feel, everything you believe, everything you are, is filtered through a lens that no one else can wear. It means your truth may never be fully understood, and that can be both a source of liberation and unbearable loneliness. Subjectivity means you walk through the world carrying your own universe, shaped by your memories, your traumas, your joys, your fears. Two people can witness the same moment and live entirely different stories. One sees safety, the other threat. One sees love, the other manipulation, and both are real to them. That's the weight of subjectivity. Your experience doesn't have to be shared to be valid, but the world often treats it like it does. In a society obsessed with objectivity, data, facts, statistics, subjectivity is dismissed as weakness, as bias, as noise. But subjectivity is the core of being human. It's what makes art resonate, what makes empathy possible, what makes identity real. And it's why no one else can ever tell you who you are. But subjectivity is also terrifying. It means the people you love may never truly understand you, that justice can be warped by perspective, that communication is always in some way broken. It means that your pain might be invisible and still valid. Subjectivity doesn't offer easy answers. It offers something messier, a world where truth bends, where feelings shape fact, and where reality is not given, but created in every fragile human mind. Deconstruction. Deconstruction doesn't tear things down to destroy them. It tears them down to reveal the lies they were built on. It's a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. A method of peeling back the layers of meaning, language, and assumptions that shape the world we blindly accept. You don't just read a text, you interrogate it. You don't just hear a truth, you ask, whose truth? At what cost? Born from the mind of Jacques Derrida, deconstruction exposes the hidden contradictions that hold up our beliefs. It shows that language isn't stable, it's slippery, that words don't contain fixed meanings. They borrow them, bleed into each other, and often betray themselves. What seems solid, man, woman, justice, freedom, is revealed to be built on oppositions, hierarchies, and exclusions. For every center, there is a margin. For every voice, a silence. And deconstruction goes after what's been silenced. This theory isn't comfortable. It dismantles the idea that anything is neutral. It tells you that every truth is haunted by what it leaves out, that every sentence carries a trace of everything it tried to forget. You begin to see how ideologies live inside language, how power hides in definitions, how oppression is baked into the very grammar of our world. To deconstruct is to look at the foundation of a belief and whisper, what if this isn't natural? What if it's constructed? And that whisper can be terrifying, because once you see the cracks, you can't unsee them. You start questioning everything, and that's the point, not to destroy meaning, but to break its illusion of permanence, to make space for something truer, messier, more human. Reification is the moment an idea hardens into a prison. It's when something abstract, like a norm, a system, a stereotype, becomes so familiar, so repeated, so unquestioned, that we start to treat it as fact, as natural, as unchangeable. Reification is when we forget that society is a human invention and begin to believe it's a law of nature. You see it every day. We say boys will be boys, as if masculinity were carved in stone. We treat race as biology, not a brutal historical construct. We accept capitalism, beauty standards, academic success, as if they are the air we breathe, not cages we've built. Reification freezes what should be fluid. It makes culture look like destiny. The danger lies in the illusion of permanence. When poverty is reified, we stop asking why the system fails and start blaming the poor. When gender roles are reified, we stop seeing choice and only see duty. When mental illness is reified, we reduce a person's soul to a diagnosis and forget their pain has context. Reification strips away history, power, and humanity. It turns living people into categories. It turns systems into gods. And once something is reified, resistance feels impossible, because how do you fight something you believe is just the way things are? This is the cruelty of reification. It makes injustice look inevitable. It makes suffering seem deserved. It makes possibility disappear. But the truth it hides is this: everything we've built, we can rebuild. The world is not fixed. It's just been frozen. And we're the ones who forgot the ice wasn't real. Narratives. Narratives are the stories that shape our world. Not the ones in books, but the ones we live inside. They're the invisible scripts that tell you who you are, what's possible, and what's forbidden. A narrative isn't just a story. It's a structure. It defines heroes and villains, victims and saviors, winners and losers. And the most dangerous thing about it, we rarely know we're inside one until it's already deciding our fate. From childhood, we're fed narratives so subtle they feel like facts. Hard work always pays off. Men don't cry. America is the land of opportunity. Good girls are quiet. These aren't just sayings, they're guiding forces. They influence who gets hired, who gets believed, who gets punished, and who gets ignored. They aren't chosen by truth. They're chosen by power. Narratives can lift people up or crush them completely. One story says, a black boy is a threat. Another says, a rich man's recklessness is genius. One says immigrants are invaders. Another says corporations are job creators. These stories are not neutral. They are weapons. And once repeated enough, they don't need evidence. They become reality through sheer force of belief. But the deepest wound narratives leave is internal. When you're cast as the failure, the angry one, the burden, you start to narrate yourself that way. Your voice becomes the echo of your oppression. That's how narratives control, not through violence, but through identity. And until you question the story, it owns your ending. Rewriting the narrative isn't just about truth, it's about reclaiming your life from the lies you never chose to believe. Mental models. Mental models are the maps in your mind. You don't see them, but you follow them. They shape how you interpret the world, how you make decisions, how you react to others, and even how you love or self-destruct. These models aren't reality. They're your version of it. And most were formed when you were too young to know the difference between truth and survival. A mental model is a deeply ingrained way of thinking. If you grew up being ignored, you might carry the model, I don't matter. If you were praised only when perfect, your model becomes, I'm only worthy when I succeed. If someone betrayed your trust, your model says, people can't be trusted. These rules live inside you, quietly dictating every move. And worst of all, you mistake them for facts. Mental models are meant to help you predict the world, but they also limit it. They become filters. You don't see things as they are. You see them as your models tell you they are. That's why two people can hear the same words and walk away with two completely different wounds. One hears rejection, the other hears opportunity. The difference isn't the moment, it's the model. And these models don't just affect individuals. They drive politics, justice, education, and war. They shape institutions, ideologies, and entire societies. They tell us what's logical, what's fair, what's real, even when they're completely wrong. The tragedy? Mental models rarely get questioned because they feel like home. Even if that home is burning, you stay because it's the only structure you've ever known. Cognitive schema. Cognitive schema is the mental blueprint you didn't know you were following. It's the internal map that tells you how the world works, what to expect, how to react, who to trust, what to fear. You weren't born with it. It was built slowly and silently through every experience, every lesson, every heartbreak and celebration. And now it shapes your reality without asking for your permission. A schema is not just a memory, it's a pattern, a shortcut your brain uses to make sense of chaos. It tells you that dogs are friendly, that red means stop, that mothers love their children. But what happens when your schema is wrong? When your brain insists you're not lovable, not safe, not enough, because once someone made you believe it, that's when a schema becomes a cage. Your cognitive schema filters everything. If you believe people always leave, then kindness feels suspicious. If you believe failure defines you, then risk becomes terror. You interpret the world not as it is, but as your schema expects it to be. And worst of all, you seek out evidence to prove it right. You walk into rooms bracing for rejection and see it in every glance. You replay every mistake, feeding the story your mind already believes. These schemas protect you, yes, but they also trap you. They keep you from joy, from connection, from seeing new possibilities. And until you question them, until you break their spell, you're not living freely. You're living on autopilot, inside a script written long ago by people who may never have seen your full worth. Imagined communities. Imagined communities are the most powerful lies we willingly believe because they make us feel like we belong. The term doesn't mean fake, it means constructed, a shared bond between people who will never meet, never speak, never touch, but who still feel connected by a common identity, a flag, a language, a passport, a national anthem. These symbols stitch millions of strangers into a single story. We are one. But this unity is imagined. You'll never know the man on the opposite coast or the woman in the mountains. You'll never break bread with them, never hear their story. Yet, if asked, you'd say, they are my people. That is the haunting beauty of imagined communities. They aren't based on actual relationships. They're based on belief, on narratives fed to us through school books, ceremonies, borders, and war. We don't just live in countries. We feel them. We cry at their tragedies, cheer at their victories, and sometimes die for them. But the nation you love is a story someone wrote, a story edited by power, stained by violence, held together by myth. And once you believe in it, it shapes your loyalty, your prejudice, your sense of self. This theory reveals how nationalism survives, not through force, but through emotion, through the aching need to be part of something greater. It explains how strangers can hate each other in war or risk their lives for people they've never met, not because they know each other, but because they've been told a story that made them feel like they do. Imagine communities bind us, and they blind us, because once you see your story as sacred, anyone outside of it starts to feel like a threat. National identity. National identity is the story a country tells about itself and demands you tell about yourself too. It's not a flag or an anthem. It's not geography. It's mythology. It's the collection of chosen memories, selective pride, and rehearsed unity that says, this is who we are, and it feels sacred, because from the moment you can speak, it's been whispered into your bones. You learn that your country is special, chosen, different. You're taught to feel pride in its victories, silence in its crimes, and shame if you ever ask the wrong questions. National identity turns history into folklore. Wars become freedom, colonizers become pioneers, inequality becomes meritocracy. It erases the mess, the blood, the rebellion. It tells you that being born within invisible borders somehow makes you belong, while those born a few feet away never can. But beneath its warmth, national identity can become a cage. It tells you who the enemies are, those with different flags, different tongues, different gods. It teaches suspicion wrapped in patriotism. And it doesn't just divide nations, it divides people within them. If you speak the wrong language, love the wrong person, wear the wrong skin, you are labeled un-American, unpatriotic, not one of us, even if you were born on that soil. National identity promises unity, but often delivers conformity. And when you try to speak outside its script, when you criticize, mourn, resist, you're told to be grateful, to be silent, to remember your place. Because to question the nation's identity is to threaten its illusion, and illusions do not die quietly. Ethnic identity. Ethnic identity is not just where you're from. It's who you are when the world tries to erase you. It's the blood memory in your name, your skin, your language, your traditions. It's the stories your ancestors whispered across generations, hoping someone, you, would remember. But in a world obsessed with sameness, ethnic identity is often treated like a problem to be solved, not a history to be honored. You don't choose your ethnicity, but you do choose how to carry it. Some wear it loudly, like armor. Others hide it quietly, like a scar. Sometimes it's forced to the surface through bullying, stereotyping, or systemic violence. You grow up in classrooms where your culture is exoticized, mocked, or ignored entirely. You're asked, where are you really from? As if you don't belong in your own body. And yet, ethnic identity becomes a source of power precisely because it survives that erasure. It becomes the rhythm in your voice, the pride in your grandparents' food, the fire behind your resistance. It connects you to something larger than yourself, something ancient, something defiant. It reminds you that you come from people who endured, who resisted, who dreamed beyond borders. But it's complicated. You may feel caught between cultures, too much for one, not enough for the other. You may feel shame, guilt, pride, love, all tangled together. That's the weight of ethnic identity in a colonized world. It's never just about heritage. It's about reclamation. Because in every moment you speak your name with pride, you are saying, we are still here, and we will not disappear quietly. Gender identity. Gender identity is the silent truth living beneath your skin, sometimes celebrated, sometimes hidden, often misunderstood. It's not what the world tells you to be. It's what you know yourself to be, even when there are no words for it. From the moment you're born, a label is slapped onto your existence, based on a body. Boy, girl, and with that label comes a script, a costume you're expected to wear, roles you're expected to play, emotions you're expected to suppress or express. But gender identity is not that script. It's not the clothes you wear or the pitch of your voice. It's deeper. It's a core sense of self, rooted in your soul, not your skin. Some feel alignment, a natural harmony between their inner world and the outer expectations. Others feel dissonance, as if their reflection never tells the truth, as if every he or she cuts like a paper-thin lie. And yet, society demands certainty, binary, conformity. Pick a side, prove it. But identity doesn't owe anyone an explanation. It is felt before it is named. It can be fluid, layered, undefinable, and still be valid, still be real. What makes gender identity so powerful is also what makes it threatening to systems of control. It cannot be dictated, only lived. To claim your gender identity, especially in a world that punishes deviation, is an act of rebellion, of self-respect, of survival. Because in the end, it's not about changing to fit the world's expectations. It's about daring to exist in the fullness of who you are, even when the world refuses to understand. Social stratification. Social stratification is the quiet staircase society builds beneath our feet before we ever learn how to walk. It's the invisible ladder that decides who rises, who stays stuck, and who never even sees the first rung. This theory reveals how people are layered, not by merit, not by effort, but by deeply entrenched systems that decide your worth the moment you're born. It's not just about income, it's about class, caste, race, gender, education, accent, neighborhood, all the unspoken markers that silently scream, you belong here and not there. From birth, you're slotted into a position wrapped in expectations. A child born into wealth is given networks, opportunities, and the language of power. A child born into poverty is handed silence, judgment, and ceilings disguised as choices. And when someone does climb out, when they rise above what the world predicted, the system calls it luck or anomaly, never a sign of its own failure. Social stratification isn't maintained by chains, it's maintained by belief. The belief that the top earned their place, that the bottom failed, that success is moral, that poverty is personal. These myths are baked into media, religion, education. They train us to blame ourselves when we struggle and to envy, not question, those above us. But the most brutal truth, the ladder wasn't built for everyone to climb. It was built to keep most people in place and convince them the view from below is just fine. Stratification doesn't just divide resources, it divides dreams, and the higher you go, the harder it becomes to remember those who were never allowed to rise. Social categories are the boxes you're shoved into before you ever speak your first word. Man, woman, black, white, rich, poor, straight, gay, able, disabled. These categories are not neutral. They're loaded with expectations, assumptions, and consequences. They don't just describe you, they decide how the world sees you, treats you, and whether it opens its arms or locks its doors. You don't choose these labels. They're placed on you by birth, by appearance, by behavior. And once they stick, they shape everything. The job you get, the safety you feel, the voice you're allowed to have. Social categories become shortcuts in a society that doesn't want to look deeper. If you fit the right box, you're welcomed without question. If you fall outside it, you're asked to explain, defend, justify your existence. These categories feel natural because we've been trained to believe they are, but they're not. They're constructed, designed to create hierarchy, to draw lines between us and them. They simplify people so they can be controlled, excluded, marketed to, or ignored. And once you internalize them, they don't just live in systems, they live in your head. You start to believe the limits they suggest. You shrink to fit them. You silence yourself to survive them. Social categories pretend to be about identity, but they're really about power. Who gets it, who loses it, and who's forced to fight every day just to be seen as whole. These boxes don't hold truth, they hold control, and every time we forget that, someone disappears behind a label they never asked to wear. Race as a construct. Race is not biology, it's mythology weaponized. A man-made illusion so powerful, it reshapes destinies, carves borders into skin, and dictates who lives freely and who lives afraid. Race as a construct means this: it was invented, designed, fabricated by societies to justify domination, to rationalize slavery, colonialism, segregation, and systemic violence. It's not rooted in genetics, it's rooted in power. There is no gene that defines blackness or whiteness, no biological line between us and them, and yet the consequences of race feel horrifyingly real, because once society accepts a myth as truth, it begins to enforce it with policy, culture, police, prisons, and prejudice, and the lie grows until people forget it was ever a lie. The construct of race was never innocent. It was born to rank, to separate, to exclude. It labeled one group superior and the other subhuman. It created invisible walls you can't see but feel every day, in job interviews, in classrooms, in traffic stops, in the way people clutch their bags when you walk by. It taught you that whiteness was the norm and anything else was deviation. And yet, the most devastating part is how deeply this construct embeds itself into identity. You begin to see yourself through the eyes of the oppressor, to question your beauty, your brilliance, your belonging. That is how a construct becomes a cage. But once exposed, race as a construct loses its grip. It can be named, challenged, unlearned, because the truth is this: race is not what we are, it's what we've been told to be. And the moment we remember that, we begin to break the spell. Gender as a construct. Gender as a construct is the quiet revelation that what we call man or woman isn't biology, it's choreography, it's performance, it's a script passed down through generations, rehearsed in schools, families, films, and fashion. It tells you how to walk, how to speak, how to hurt, how to love, and most dangerously, it convinces you it's natural. But gender, at its core, is not fixed. It's a story society tells to make order out of difference. A child is born, given a color, a name, a set of instructions before they've even spoken a word. And from that moment, the costume is stitched. Boys play rough, don't cry, lead. Girls smile, shrink, nurture. Those who obey are rewarded with approval. Those who don't, mocked, isolated, broken into compliance. To say gender is constructed isn't to say it isn't real, it's to say it was made, built on ideas, not anatomy, reinforced through laws, traditions, bathrooms, beauty standards, and violence. If you step out of line, the world notices. If you reject the role, the world resists. Because if one person dares to live outside the binary, the whole illusion starts to crack. Understanding gender as a construct doesn't erase identity. It frees it. It means you are more than what you've been told to be, that you can be soft and strong, tender and brave, feminine and fierce, masculine and vulnerable, or none of those things at all. The lie was never that gender exists. The lie was that it had to be one thing and that anything else was wrong. Disability as a construct. Disability as a construct is the radical truth that the problem was never your body. It was the world's refusal to make space for it. We are taught to see disability as a defect, a flaw, a personal tragedy. But what if the real issue isn't in the person, but in the environment that refuses to accommodate difference? This theory doesn't deny physical or cognitive variations. It denies that they should be the basis for exclusion, shame, or invisibility. From ramps that don't exist, to classrooms that silence neurodivergent minds, to workplaces that reward conformity over creativity, Disability is often created by design, not biology. A blind person isn't disabled by their lack of sight. They're disabled by a society that relies solely on visual communication. A wheelchair doesn't limit freedom. Stairs do. It's not the condition that disables. It's the inaccessibility, the indifference, the assumption that only certain bodies matter. This construct reveals how society builds barriers and then blames those who can't climb them. It pathologizes difference and wraps it in pity or inspiration, never equality. The disabled body becomes a symbol of weakness, of burden, of charity. Rarely is it seen as whole, as complex, as powerful in its own right. And the most painful part, many internalize this lie. They shrink, apologize, overcompensate. But the truth is clear. There is nothing inherently broken about a disabled person. What's broken is a world that measures worth by productivity, normalcy, and perfection. Disability, then, is not a flaw in the individual. It is the failure of a system to embrace the full spectrum of being human. Age as a construct. Age as a construct is the lie we're all taught to live by. A timeline scripted before we even begin. It tells us when we should speak, when we should rebel, when we should settle, when we should shrink, and when we should disappear. From the outside, it looks like biology. But dig deeper, and you'll see something far more human. Judgment, expectation, and control wrapped in numbers. You're told what age is too old to dream, to dance, to wear certain clothes, to change careers, to fall in love. You're told what age is too young to be taken seriously, to have a voice, to make decisions, to feel deep pain. But who decided this? Not nature, society. Age isn't just a count of years. It's a measuring stick used to justify dismissal, pressure, and exclusion. Children are told to obey. Teens are labeled dramatic. Adults are crushed by timelines. Marriage, kids, success, all before some invisible deadline. And the elderly, they're often treated like fading shadows, even while holding lifetimes of wisdom. It's not age itself that limits us. It's what society attaches to it. Age becomes a weapon when used to silence and shame. A young woman with ambition is too much. An older man who cries is too soft. A middle-aged person chasing joy is having a crisis. None of these are facts. They're scripts. Age, as we live it, is not biology. It's performance, a role we're punished for rewriting. And the cruelest part? We learn to police ourselves, to mourn time not because we feel it, but because we were taught that with each passing year, we are less relevant, less beautiful, less allowed. But the truth is, age never limits us. Only the story we've been told about it does. Childhood as a construct. Childhood feels sacred, pure, innocent, protected. But what if that image isn't truth, but invention? Childhood as a construct means that what we call normal for children, their roles, freedoms, limits, even their innocence, is not natural or universal. It's built, shaped by history, culture, and power. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. In medieval Europe, there was no childhood as we know it. Children were mini adults, expected to work, endure, obey. It wasn't until centuries later, when industrialization and privilege collided, that childhood was romanticized. White middle-class children portrayed as fragile angels to be sheltered and preserved, but only some children, poor children, black children, indigenous children, they were never allowed that same fantasy. This construct tells us when a child should speak, when they should learn, when they can be heard, but more importantly, when they can't. It creates age-based hierarchies where power flows one way. Because I said so becomes law, their fears are minimized, their voices dismissed, and often their trauma overlooked as just a phase. We imagine childhood as freedom, but for many, it's confinement, surveillance, suppression. We dress it up with toys and lullabies while ignoring the systems that silence and shape kids into what society needs them to be: obedient, marketable, palatable. And when children rebel, speak out, ask too many questions, we say they're acting grown. But maybe they're just sensing the truth that the version of childhood they've been handed was never designed for their liberation, only their control. Childhood isn't just a stage of life, it's a story we've told, and we decide who gets to live it. Normalcy. Normalcy is the most seductive illusion society ever sold you. It's the whisper that tells you, fit in and you'll be safe. It's the silent contract that trades authenticity for acceptance. But here's the truth no one dares to say: normal doesn't exist. It's a shifting target, a social invention built not to define people, but to control them. From childhood, we're taught the rules of normalcy like sacred scripture. Speak this way, look that way, want these things, fear those, walk into a room and be palatable, be predictable, don't be too loud, don't be too different. And if you are, if your body moves differently, if your love doesn't look familiar, if your mind doesn't follow the straight path, you're labeled broken, disordered, other. But who decides what's normal? It's not the majority. It's not truth. It's power. It's the ones who benefit when everyone else stays silent, compliant, ashamed. Normalcy doesn't reflect reality. It polices it. It defines health in ways that erase the neurodivergent. It defines beauty in ways that erase the fat, the scarred, the dark-skinned. It defines behavior in ways that erase the grieving, the angry, the wild. And so people learn to fake it, to fold their edges, to shrink their brilliance, because the cost of being not normal can be cruel: rejection, ridicule, invisibility. But the cost of chasing normalcy? It's losing yourself. Normalcy is not safety. It's submission wrapped in approval. And the moment you realize that, you can stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, who benefits from me believing I need to be fixed? Beauty standards. Beauty standards are the quiet dictators of worth, ruthless, shifting, and always out of reach. They don't just tell you what to look like, they tell you whether you matter. From glossy magazine covers to airbrushed influencers, society holds up a mirror not to reflect you, but to distort you. And the worst part? You start chasing the reflection anyway. These standards aren't natural. They're manufactured, built by industries that profit from your insecurity. They decide that pale skin is elegant, dark skin is exotic, that thinness is discipline, curves are indulgence, that wrinkles are failures, scars are shame, fat is a flaw. And because these rules are unspoken, they become law without resistance. We internalize them young. A little girl watching her mother tug at her stomach, a boy flinching at the mirror, learning muscles equal manhood. The message is clear. Your body is not yours to love. It must be judged, modified, fixed. Beauty becomes a performance, a ritual of plucking, starving, whitening, smoothing, erasing. And even when you fit, it's never enough. There's always a new ideal, a new flaw, a new product. Because the goal isn't to make you beautiful, it's to keep you desperate. And the cruelty runs deeper. Beauty standards don't just shape self-esteem, they shape privilege. Those who match them move through the world with unearned ease, job offers, attention, love. Those who don't, they're sidelined, stared at, or made invisible. But the lie that beauty equals value is the sharpest blade. It cuts deeper than judgment. It cuts identity, and until it's exposed, it will keep whispering that you are not enough, even when you were never meant to be anything but whole. Masculinity. Masculinity is a mask many are forced to wear, not to express themselves, but to survive. It's sold as strength, dominance, stoicism, success. But beneath that armor is often fear, fear of softness, fear of failure, fear of not being man enough. From boyhood, masculinity is drilled in through silence and shame. Man up. Don't cry. Be tough. Those words don't build character, they bury it. Masculinity, as we've been taught, isn't a natural instinct. It's a social script, a construct handed down through generations, reinforced in locker rooms, media, boardrooms, battlefields, and homes. It tells men that their worth is measured by what they conquer, suppress, and control. Emotion becomes weakness, vulnerability becomes a threat, and intimacy often punished before it's ever understood. But what no one tells you is how much masculinity costs: the emotional isolation, the quiet rage, the broken relationships, the pressure to perform a version of manhood that's impossible to sustain and hollow at its core. And when men can't live up to it, they implode or explode, hurting themselves or others in the process. The truth is, masculinity doesn't protect men. It imprisons them. It rewards performance over presence, pride over peace, and the pain it causes is rarely named, because naming it would mean admitting that the story of what it means to be a man is broken. To unlearn masculinity is not to lose manhood. It's to reclaim it from the lie, to say that being a man can mean softness, fear, honesty, gentleness, that masculinity isn't fixed, it's fluid, and when we stop forcing boys to harden, we finally let them become whole. Femininity. Femininity is not softness. It's not sweetness, dresses, or delicacy. It is a performance, a myth, a carefully crafted script handed to you before you could even speak. From birth, you are bathed in pink, hushed when loud, praised when small. You are told femininity is power, but only when it comforts others, only when it doesn't challenge, only when it plays by the rules. Femininity is praised when it's pleasing, when it's beautiful, when it smiles through pain. But when it's angry, assertive, loud, suddenly it's too much, too emotional, too intense. It's a trap dressed up as praise. You are told to be desirable, but not demanding, nurturing, but never needy, sexual, but not in control. It is not just men who enforce this. It is institutions, media, families, women themselves. Femininity is used to divide, to create good girls and bad ones, to shame the messy, the wild, the defiant. But here's the secret no one wants you to know. Femininity isn't fixed. It isn't natural. It's performed, rehearsed, reinforced through magazines, classrooms, movies, and glances. And when someone dares to rewrite it, to be feminine on their own terms, or to reject it altogether, the backlash is brutal. Because femininity, as constructed, was never about women. It was about control. Yet, within that cage, there is also rebellion, a woman who wears heels like armor, a boy who paints his nails, a non-binary person who reclaims softness as strength. Femininity can be fluid, fierce, untamed, but only when it stops being about approval and starts being about truth. Binary oppositions. Binary oppositions are the rigid walls that divide our world into two neat, deceptive boxes: good versus evil, man versus woman, black versus white, strong versus weak, rational versus emotional. They make the world feel simple, digestible, clean, but they're a lie, a comforting illusion that flattens the messy, vibrant complexity of human existence into something cold, hierarchical, and controlled. This concept reveals how these binaries aren't just descriptions, they're judgments. One side is always privileged, the other diminished. Masculine is strong, feminine is weak. Logic is praised, emotion is dismissed. Light is pure, dark is dangerous. These aren't just opposites, they're power structures. The dominant term defines the standard. The other becomes the deviation, the flaw, the danger. Binary oppositions are the foundation of systems that divide, conquer, and erase. They don't just separate, they assign worth. And once you're placed on the lesser side of a binary, the world stops listening to your complexity. A man who cries is mocked. A woman who leads is labeled. A person between genders is treated like a glitch in the program. But here's the haunting truth. The binary doesn't just limit how the world sees you. It limits how you see yourself. It makes you choose, forces you to suppress the parts that don't fit the mold. It splits you in half and calls that clarity. Binary oppositions pretend to offer order, but what they really offer is obedience. And the moment you stop believing in them, the world doesn't become more chaotic. It becomes more honest, more human, more free. Perception of reality. Perception of reality is the cruel magic trick your brain plays on you, convincing you that what you see, hear, and believe is truth, when in fact it's a filtered, fragile, deeply personal construction. You don't experience reality, you interpret it through memory, emotion, trauma, culture, and expectation. Your eyes aren't cameras, your mind isn't neutral. Everything you call real is colored by who you are, where you've been, and what you've survived. This is why two people can live the same moment and walk away with different truths. One sees kindness, the other sees manipulation. One hears silence, the other feels rejection. It's not about what happened, it's about what it meant. And meaning is shaped by the stories you've been told and the ones you tell yourself. Perception of reality is why fear can feel like fact, why shame can echo louder than praise, why love can blind you to red flags, and pain can distort even the purest moments. Your brain fills in gaps. It invents certainty. It prioritizes survival over accuracy. It doesn't ask what's true. It asks, what will keep me safe? And that answer is often warped. The danger lies in forgetting this, in believing that your reality is the reality, that your truth is universal, that what you see is all there is, that mistake breeds conflict, judgment, and isolation. Because when someone challenges your reality, it doesn't feel like disagreement, it feels like attack. But perception is not weakness, it's humanity. And when we learn to question our own lens, to listen without defense, we crack the illusion and make space for something deeper than truth, understanding. Cultural scripts. Cultural scripts are the unwritten lines you've been reciting your whole life, lines you never chose, but ones that define who you're allowed to be. They are the subconscious instructions passed down through family, media, tradition, and fear. They tell you when to speak, how to love, what to dream, and when to stop dreaming. And the tragedy is, most people follow them without ever realizing they exist. If you are born a girl, your script might say, be quiet, be pretty, be nurturing, don't take up too much space. If you're born a boy, be tough, be dominant, don't cry, don't break. If you're born into poverty, be grateful, don't complain, work hard, stay small. These scripts don't whisper, they scream, and if you try to rewrite them, the world pushes back hard. They are culturally specific, yet universally binding. In one place, success is a mansion. In another, it's obedience. In one home, silence is safety. In another, rebellion is survival. And because these scripts are learned early, before you have language to resist, they burrow into your identity. You begin to believe they are you, but they aren't. They are a performance you were taught to perfect. And if you miss a line, if you fall out of character, you risk ridicule, shame, even exile. That's how deep cultural scripts run. They threaten your sense of belonging if you dare to improvise. The heartbreak? Some people never escape the roles written for them. They spend their lives playing parts that suffocate their truth. And the miracle? Some tear up the script and start writing their own, even if their voice shakes, even if they're alone, because freedom begins where the script ends. Myth. Myth is not a story from long ago. It's the lie we still live inside. It's the tale society tells so often, so loudly, that we stop questioning it. Myths don't need to be true to be powerful. They just need to be repeated. They are the sacred illusions we wrap around identity, success, morality, gender, love, race, power, until they feel like fact. You've heard them your whole life, that hard work always pays off, that good people always win, that beauty equals value, that men are protectors and women nurturers, that suffering builds character. These aren't just phrases, they're blueprints, and they shape how we treat others and how we allow ourselves to be treated. The danger of myth is that it replaces complexity with comfort. It silences dissent. If you suffer, the myth says it's your fault. If you don't succeed, you didn't try hard enough. If you don't fit the mold, you're the problem, not the mold itself. And so we keep striving, performing, breaking ourselves to fit into a story that was never written with us in mind. But myths don't live in ancient temples. They live in textbooks, in childhood stories, in religion, media, history books, and family dinner tables. And once a myth takes root, it becomes harder to unlearn than the truth ever was to discover. To challenge myth is to become dangerous, because myth protects power. It builds empires, upholds systems, and keeps the majority chasing fantasies that serve the few. But when you finally name the myth, something sacred happens. The story cracks, and through that crack, your real voice begins to speak. Foucauldian discourse. Foucauldian discourse is the quiet machinery behind every truth you've ever accepted without question. It's not just language, it's power. It's the system that decides which ideas are speakable, which identities are valid, which bodies are controlled, and which truths become law. Michel Foucault didn't just study what people said, he studied who was allowed to speak and what the consequences were for those who didn't obey the script. Discourse is the reason a doctor's diagnosis holds more weight than a patient's pain. It's why a courtroom can call someone criminal before they've ever spoken. It's why sexuality, madness, gender, race, and even sanity have been defined not by experience, but by the institutions that manage them. Medicine, religion, academia, the state, these are not neutral forces. They create meaning. They produce reality. In Foucault's world, knowledge is never innocent. It's a weapon disguised as truth. Discourse creates normal by labeling everything else as deviant. It doesn't just describe, it disciplines. You don't speak freely within discourse. You speak through it. Every word you choose either reinforces the dominant narrative or risks becoming a target. Foucaultian discourse shows how history is written not by facts, but by those with the authority to define them. Why some love is sacred and some love is sin. Why some lives are protected and some are disposable. And perhaps most chilling, it shows how we internalize these discourses, regulating ourselves before anyone else needs to. This isn't conspiracy. It's control hiding in plain sight. And once you recognize discourse, you start to see it everywhere, in your textbooks, your prayers, your pronouns, your fears. And suddenly, silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like obedience. Discursive formation. Discursive formation is the architecture of meaning, the silent, powerful process by which language doesn't just describe the world, but creates it. It's how entire systems of thought are built, brick by invisible brick, through what can be said, who can say it, and what is considered valid. This isn't just about words, it's about control, because discourse doesn't just shape conversation, it shapes reality. Coined by Michel Foucault, discursive formation reveals that knowledge isn't neutral. It's constructed by power. It asks, who decided that one way of speaking is scientific while another is superstition? Who gets to define sanity, morality, intelligence, femininity? The answer isn't objectivity, it's authority. Institutions, schools, courts, clinics, media become factories of discourse, producing truths that are rarely questioned but fiercely enforced. What makes discursive formation terrifying is how easily we mistake it for common sense. A diagnosis becomes an identity. A label becomes a sentence. A word becomes a weapon. Language narrows what is possible. If there are no words for your experience, it becomes unspeakable. If your pain doesn't fit the accepted vocabulary, it becomes invisible. But there's also power here, because when you recognize discursive formations, you realize they can be challenged, rewritten, reclaimed. That silence isn't the absence of truth, it's the result of suppression. And speaking, naming, can be rebellion. Discursive formation is the reason we fear certain words and cling to others. It's the ghost in our grammar, the politics in our punctuation. It reminds us that language is never just about communication. It's about domination, liberation, and the battle over who gets to define the world we live in. Constructed meaning. Constructed meaning is the stunning, unsettling realization that nothing means what it means on its own. Meaning isn't discovered, it's made, crafted in conversation, cemented in culture, shaped by power, and repeated until it feels like truth. A flag, a wedding ring, a silence, a smile, none of them speak on their own. They borrow their voice from the stories we assign them. We grow up thinking the world is full of objective truths, that love is pure, that success looks like wealth, that rules are rules because they're right. But constructed meaning shatters that illusion. It shows us that love can mean control, success can mean exhaustion, and rules can be written to benefit only the few. A word, a gesture, even a color can mean one thing to you and the opposite to someone else. There is no fixed language, only shared illusions. This concept doesn't just live in philosophy books. It lives in your everyday life, in the way you read a text message and spiral for hours because of a single period, in the way your culture taught you what's sacred and what's shameful, in the way you heard "I love you" once and it healed you, and again and it broke you. Constructed meaning is why a slur can destroy and a compliment can wound, because the power of a word isn't in the sound, it's in the story, the history, the context. And once you realize that meaning is made, not found, you stop asking, "What does this mean?" and start asking, "Who decided it should mean that?" And that's where liberation begins. Ideological apparatuses. Ideological apparatuses are the invisible machines that shape your beliefs before you even know you have them. They don't need to threaten you. They don't need to punish you. They work silently through schools, churches, media, families, pop culture, and even the language you use. They don't control you with chains. They control you with stories. Coined by Louis Althusser, this theory exposes how systems of power reproduce themselves not through violence, but through ideas, through normalization, through repetition. From the moment you enter a classroom, you're being taught more than math or grammar. You're learning obedience, respect for hierarchy, belief in the system. At church, you're learning morality, whose suffering is holy, whose voice is righteous. On TV, you're being shown who gets to be a hero, who gets to be saved, and who gets left behind. These ideological apparatuses don't tell you what to think. That would be too obvious. They tell you how to think. They shape your desires, your fears, your sense of self. They convince you that your role in society is natural, even if it's one of silence, shame, or servitude. That's the terrifying beauty of ideology. You don't know you're under its spell until you try to step outside it. And when someone finally does, when they reject the lesson, question the priest, mock the news, or refuse the right path, they're called dangerous, radical, ungrateful, because ideological apparatuses don't just create belief, they defend it. They produce people who will fight for the very systems that oppress them, because they've been taught to believe that system is home. Social conventions. Social conventions are the invisible rules you follow without ever signing up for them. They tell you how to act at a dinner table, how long to hold a handshake, when to laugh, when to cry, and when to stay silent, even though your soul is screaming. They're the etiquette of survival in a world that values comfort over authenticity. You don't remember learning them, but break one and you'll never forget the reaction. These conventions aren't written down, they're absorbed through side-eye, sighs, applause, and punishment. They shape everything: how close you stand to someone, what emotions are appropriate, what's too much. They teach little boys to toughen up, little girls to be polite, and everyone else to fit into boxes they never chose. They turn human behavior into performance and call it maturity. The terror of social conventions lies in their subtlety. They're not enforced with laws, they're enforced with shame. If you cry in the wrong place, love the wrong person, speak too loudly, or don't speak at all, you're seen as off, not because you've done harm, but because you've broken the spell of predictability. These rules claim to keep society smooth, but what they often do is keep people small. We smile when we want to scream. We shake hands when we want to run. We stay quiet in rooms that need truth, and we call it grace. But social conventions were made by people, which means they can be questioned, rewritten, refused, because there's a cost to following every rule. Sometimes it's you. Norm creation. Norm creation is how the ordinary becomes law, not by force, but by repetition. It's the subtle, relentless process through which society decides what's acceptable, respectable, beautiful, moral, not because it's right, but because it's repeated. A behavior, a belief, an expectation is performed enough times, in enough places, by enough people until it feels natural. But natural is just practice. Familiar is just rehearsed. And norms, they're just habits we mistake for truth. You see norm creation in how we dress, how we greet, how we date, how we mourn. It's why standing silently in an elevator feels right, why shaking hands means respect, why monogamy is seen as mature. None of these are universal. They're just deeply social, agreed upon, reinforced, enforced. And the terrifying part, you don't notice norms until you break them. Speak too loudly, dress too differently, question too publicly. Suddenly, the room tightens, eyes shift, judgment coils in the silence. That's how you know a norm has been created. It punishes those who forget the rules no one wrote down. Norms don't rise by logic. They rise by comfort, by imitation, by power. They often serve those at the top and shame those at the margins. And once they're in place, they're defended like sacred ground. It's just the way things are, people say. But it's not. It's the way things have been taught to be. Norm creation doesn't need truth. It only needs memory, fear, and time. And if we're not careful, we start performing these norms even when they hurt us, just to be accepted, just to survive. Marginalization. Marginalization is the quiet violence of being pushed to the edge, of being told without words that your voice doesn't matter, your presence is inconvenient, your life is optional. It's not always loud. Sometimes it whispers. It looks like being spoken over, like always being the exception, like being left out of the room where decisions are made about people like you without anyone who is you. Marginalization doesn't just deny resources, it denies recognition. It makes you invisible in plain sight. It erases your history from textbooks, your stories from media, your face from leadership. It forces you to constantly explain yourself, to prove your worth, to apologize for existing in spaces never meant for you. And when you get tired, when you raise your voice, you're told you're angry, ungrateful, too much. But the truth is, marginalization isn't accidental. It's designed. It's built into policies, architecture, education, healthcare, art, even language. It decides who gets comfort and who gets consequence, who gets humanized and who gets statistics. It isolates, fragments, and gaslights, convincing you that the walls closing in on you are your own fault. The pain of marginalization isn't just exclusion, it's erasure. It's watching your culture mocked until someone else profits from it. It's sharing your truth and being met with silence. It's knowing that when you speak, people listen differently, if they listen at all. To be marginalized is to carry the weight of invisibility, to fight for space in a world that treats your existence as background noise. And yet, despite that weight, marginalized voices still rise. because silence is a wound that demands to be heard. Dominant narratives. Dominant narratives are the stories the world tells over and over until you stop questioning them and start living by them. They're not just tales, they're truths carved into culture. They shape what's possible, what's desirable, what's normal. They are told by those in power, about those without it, and they are rarely neutral. These narratives say things like, hard work always leads to success. Marriage is the ultimate goal. Men are protectors. Poor people just didn't try hard enough. Some lives are worth more than others. These are not facts. They're scripts designed to comfort the comfortable and erase everyone who doesn't fit. If your story doesn't align, it's called a lie, a phase, a mistake, a tragedy. Dominant narratives are written into textbooks, headlines, movie plots, hiring decisions, sentencing laws. They tell us whose pain matters, whose voice is credible, whose body is beautiful, whose grief is valid. They drown out every story that challenges them, and they don't just silence. They reshape. A protest becomes a riot, a survivor becomes unstable, a marginalized identity becomes a threat. What makes dominant narratives so dangerous is how quietly they work. You don't hear them. They are the background noise, the unquestioned assumptions, the truths that feel like air, until one day you can't breathe. To challenge these narratives is not just to speak up, it's to make space for stories that were buried alive, stories that don't flatter power, stories that scream when told. Because the moment you make space for those stories, the dominant narrative starts to crack. And that crack, that's where justice begins to echo. Narrative identity is the story you tell yourself to make sense of who you are. It's the voice in your head that says, this is what I've lived, this is what it means. It weaves your memories, traumas, triumphs, and failures into a coherent tale, a tale that gives your life shape, reason, and direction. But what no one tells you is that this story isn't fixed. It's fragile, and sometimes it's a lie. We're not born with a sense of self. We build it, piece by piece, through the narratives we absorb from the world and from within. If you've always been treated like a burden, your narrative might be, I ruin things. If you've always been praised for sacrifice, you may start believing, I'm only valuable when I suffer. These stories don't feel like choices, they feel like truth, but they're reflections of how the world has seen you and how you've learned to survive. Narrative identity can save us or destroy us. A person who reframes their past can reclaim it. A person who clings to shame can drown in it. And the scariest part? Most people never challenge their own story. They just repeat it, rehearse it, relive it until it becomes a prison. But the power of narrative identity is this. If it was written, it can be rewritten. You can be more than what happened to you, more than what others called you, more than the role you've always played. Your past is not your prophecy. The pen is in your hand, and sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is tell a new story about who you are. Identity construction. Identity construction is the lifelong act of becoming and unbecoming who you are. It's not a single moment of self-discovery. It's a slow, messy process of building a self out of fragments, family expectations, cultural narratives, trauma, desire, rebellion, survival. You are not born with a fixed identity. You assemble it piece by painful piece through every glance, every rejection, every validation that told you what you were allowed to be. It starts when you're young, when someone tells you you're the smart one, the troublemaker, the pretty girl, the weird kid. Those labels stick like glue, and you shape yourself around them. You absorb the rules of your gender, your race, your class, your faith, not because you understand them, but because the world rewards you for obeying and punishes you when you don't. You learn how to shrink to fit, how to perform, how to disappear, but the construction never stops. You pick up new pieces, lovers who teach you you're lovable, jobs that make you feel invisible, friendships that make you feel real. You shed old skins, you break molds, and sometimes you look in the mirror and wonder whose reflection you're seeing because it doesn't look like freedom, it looks like armor. What makes identity construction so fragile, so human, is that it's built in relationship. You become you in the eyes of others. You try on selves like costumes, hoping one will finally feel like home. And when someone sees the real you, truly sees you, it feels like waking up. Because identity isn't just who you are, it's who you dare to be when the world is watching. Symbolic boundaries. Symbolic boundaries are the invisible fences we build between us and them, not out of necessity, but out of identity. They are the mental lines that separate the worthy from the unworthy, the civilized from the crude, the insider from the outsider. These boundaries don't just describe difference, they define who gets to belong. And they're drawn not with reason, but with emotion, fear, pride, and power. They live in language. Those people, real Americans, proper women, they live in tastes, manners, clothing, accents, even the music you like or the food you eat. They whisper who's educated and who's ignorant, who's respectable and who's disposable, who should be trusted and who should be watched. Symbolic boundaries often feel natural, but they are deeply social. They are taught, reinforced through media, families, schools, religions, and traditions. You're praised for staying inside them, punished for stepping outside. They tell you who to date, who to hire, who to help, who to fear. The danger isn't that these boundaries exist. The danger is that we treat them as truth. And once they harden, they become social boundaries, gates to opportunity, safety, love. The lines in our minds turn into walls in our systems. Suddenly, it's not just they're different, it's they don't deserve. But symbolic boundaries aren't fixed. They shift, evolve, and sometimes crack wide open. When someone crosses them, when they refuse to act, love, or live the way they're supposed to, they aren't just being bold. They are challenging the map of belonging, and that act threatens everything we think keeps the world in order. Social frames. Social frames are the invisible lenses through which we interpret every moment, every word, every face. They are the mental boundaries that tell us what's happening, how we should feel about it, and what role we're supposed to play. Frames aren't objective, they're inherited. They're stories in disguise, rules pretending to be instincts, and once you're inside a frame, it's almost impossible to see outside of it. Think of a crying woman in a courtroom. One frame says, she's emotional, irrational, unreliable. Another says, she's grieving, brave, human. The facts don't change, only the frame does, and that frame shapes everything. The verdict, the public opinion, the memory. Social frames don't just influence perception, they create reality. They tell us that a man yelling in a boardroom is passionate, but a woman doing the same is unhinged, that a person defending their culture is divisive, but one mocking it is funny. These frames aren't just about interpretation, they're about power, because the ability to define the frame is the ability to control the story. And the terrifying part? Most of the time, we don't even realize we're inside a frame. We call it common sense, how things are, the bigger picture. But in truth, it's a carefully constructed window, one that includes some truths and locks out others. It decides who is the victim, who is the villain, who deserves empathy, who gets erased. To challenge a social frame is to risk being misunderstood, dismissed, or punished. But it's also the only way to see clearly. Because sometimes the problem isn't what you're looking at, it's the frame you've been taught to look through. Cultural constructs. Cultural constructs are the beautifully wrapped lies we mistake for truth. They're the ideas, beliefs, and expectations that feel like second nature, but were planted there by culture, not reality. They tell us what a family is, what beauty looks like, what success means, who gets to lead, and who must follow. They are not facts, they are fabrications, but because everyone believes them, they feel real, unshakable, sacred. From the moment we're born, we're handed these constructs like invisible blueprints. They shape how we see the world and how we see ourselves. You're told pink is for girls, strength is for men, thin is healthy, rich is smart, and marriage is the goal. You're taught that work equals worth, that love has a script, that aging is something to hide. And because it all feels normal, you rarely stop to ask, who wrote these rules and who do they serve? Cultural constructs are passed down like heirlooms. They are reinforced in lullabies, textbooks, holidays, and headlines. They show up in what's celebrated, what's punished, what's remembered, and what's erased. And the danger? When we mistake them for truth, we start punishing others and ourselves for not fitting in. If you've ever felt broken, chances are you were just clashing with a construct that never fit you. And yet, we blame ourselves instead of the blueprint. But these constructs aren't natural, they're taught, which means they can be untaught. You weren't born to be a copy of culture. You were born to be something far more radical, yourself, unfiltered. And once you see the constructs for what they are, you begin to rebuild a world that's yours, not inherited, imagined. Meaning-making. Meaning-making is the desperate, beautiful act of turning chaos into story. It's what we do when life shatters, when love leaves, when dreams collapse. We reach into the wreckage and try to make sense of it. It's the most human instinct we have, to ask, why did this happen? And more quietly, what does this say about me? We are not built to survive emptiness, so we fill it with language, with memory, with belief. We build narratives around our pain to make it feel useful. We tell ourselves that suffering made us stronger, that heartbreak taught us something, that failure was preparing us for something better. Even if it's not true, we need it to be. Because without meaning, the world feels random, and random is unbearable. Meaning-making is why two people can live the same moment and walk away with different scars. One calls it destiny, the other calls it betrayal. Because we don't respond to events, we respond to the meaning we give them, and that meaning is shaped by our past, our hopes, our fears, and the stories we've inherited from culture, family, faith. But meaning-making is also where healing begins, when we rewrite the narrative, when we stop asking why we weren't enough and start asking who convinced us we had to be perfect, when we stop seeing loss as punishment and start seeing it as part of being fully, painfully alive. The most dangerous stories are the ones we don't question, the ones we repeat in silence. But the moment we realize that meaning isn't found, it's made, we can begin to shape a life that isn't just survived, but understood, and maybe even sacred. Social myths. Social myths are the beautiful lies we're all taught to believe, the glittering illusions that give order to chaos, purpose to pain, and justification to injustice. They're not fairy tales. They're the narratives so deeply embedded in our culture, we stop seeing them as stories and start accepting them as truth. They don't need proof. They need belief. And once believed, they shape how we see ourselves, each other, and the world. These myths tell us that anyone can succeed if they try hard enough, that love always conquers all, that justice is blind, that family is sacred, that men are protectors and women are nurturers, that good people get rewarded and bad people get what they deserve. They sound noble, comforting, but they're designed to maintain order, not to reflect reality. Social myths don't just soothe, they silence. They tell the struggling, you just didn't work hard enough. They tell the abused, forgive and forget. They tell the marginalized, wait your turn. These myths disguise oppression as fate and privilege as merit. They turn systemic failure into personal shame. And the most dangerous thing, we repeat them. We tattoo them onto our values, teach them to our children, post them in inspirational quotes, all while ignoring the people these myths have failed, have buried. But when someone tells the truth, the raw, painful, messy truth that defies the myth, they are often dismissed, even hated, because myths feel safer than reality. But myths are not medicine. They are cages dressed in gold, and the moment you stop repeating them, you begin to see the cracks in the story. And from those cracks, truth can finally breathe. Naturalization. Naturalization is the quiet lie that says, this is just how it is. It's the process by which human-made ideas, power structures, roles, traditions, hierarchies are disguised as nature, as truth, as inevitability. It's how oppression becomes ordinary, how injustice is mistaken for logic, how centuries of violence are softened into culture, and rigid gender scripts are wrapped in the language of biology. From the moment you're born, naturalization is already at work. Boys will be boys. Motherhood is instinct. Some people are just smarter. These aren't observations, they're ideologies pretending to be facts. They erase context, rewrite history, and dismiss the possibility of change. If something is natural, you're not supposed to question it. You're supposed to accept it, even if it hurts you, even if it chains you. Naturalization is what allows privilege to feel earned and poverty to feel deserved. It's why people can look at systemic inequality and say, well, that's just life. It's how stereotypes survive, how racism hides behind science, how queerness is framed as deviation instead of variation. It tells you that your discomfort with the system is irrational because the system is supposedly rooted in nature. But nature is wild. It's diverse. It doesn't conform to binaries or borders. What's truly natural is complexity, evolution, change, and that's what naturalization fears most. The truth that everything we take for granted, every law, every norm, every role was created, and anything created can be undone. Naturalization doesn't chain you with force. It chains you with belief, and the moment you stop calling something natural, you start realizing it was never neutral. It was chosen, it was built, and it can be dismantled. Epistemic communities. Epistemic communities are the architects of truth, the gatekeepers of what society agrees to call knowledge. They are not just groups of experts. They are networks of belief, trust, and influence. Scientists, academics, policy advisors, analysts, specialists, people whose shared background, education, language, and values allow them to speak with authority, not just about facts, but about what facts mean. And once they speak, the world listens. These communities don't just gather information, they shape it. They define problems, suggest solutions, and set the terms of debate. When the climate crisis enters policy, when pandemics trigger global lockdowns, when new technologies are regulated or unleashed, it's epistemic communities behind the curtain, guiding those in power with a quiet, persuasive force. But what makes them powerful also makes them dangerous, because epistemic communities don't just deal in facts, they deal in framing. They decide what counts as knowledge and what gets dismissed as myth, emotion, or noise. And if you don't speak their language, if you're poor, uncredentialed, outside their circle, you may be right, but you'll never be heard. They don't mean to exclude, but they do. Their expertise builds trust, but it also builds walls. And the higher the wall, the harder it is for new truths to break through. This is the haunting paradox. We need epistemic communities to guide us through chaos. But if we trust them blindly, we risk mistaking consensus for truth and ignoring the voices that warn us from the margins. Truth is not just what's proven, it's what's possible. And sometimes it lives outside the room where experts gather. Social practices. Social practices are the rituals we perform without thinking, the repeated actions, gestures, customs, and routines that hold our lives together like stitches. They tell us when to shake hands, how to mourn, how to celebrate, how to eat, speak, work, love. They are passed down through generations like muscle memory, so ingrained we mistake them for instinct. But they're not instinct, they're inheritance. From saying bless you after a sneeze to standing for an anthem, from wearing white at a wedding to staying quiet in an elevator, social practices shape the rhythm of our daily lives. They give us predictability in a chaotic world, and yet their power lies in their invisibility, because the moment you break one, even softly, you feel the weight of every disapproving glance. You feel the pressure to correct yourself, to fall back into the rhythm. Social practices don't just guide behavior, they reinforce belonging. If you know the practice, you belong. If you don't, you're marked as outsider. Immigrants feel it when they mispronounce a name. Neurodivergent people feel it when they speak too honestly. Queer people feel it when their love doesn't mirror the script. To break a social practice, even unintentionally, is to risk social punishment. But here's the secret. These practices aren't sacred. They're constructed. And when they stop serving us, they can be changed. In fact, they are changing all the time. Every time someone dares to show up differently, love differently, grieve differently, the world shifts a little. And maybe that's the most powerful practice of all, rewriting the script without apology. Constructed emotions. Constructed emotions are the truth behind every feeling you thought was instinct. We like to believe emotions are raw, universal, born into our bones: fear, anger, love, joy. But the truth is darker and far more human. Emotions are not hardwired, they're built, shaped by language, molded by culture, crafted by experience. You don't just feel, you learn how to feel. A child falls and looks to a parent, not for comfort, but for cues. Do we cry? Do we laugh? Are we brave or are we broken? That's where emotion is constructed, in the space between the body's signal and society's story. Anger in one culture is shameful, in another, it's strength. Sadness in one home is a weakness, in another, it's sacred. You learn not just what emotions are, but which ones are allowed. Constructed emotions are why some people smile when they're terrified, why others cry when they're overwhelmed with joy, why a woman is taught to call her fury overreacting, and a man is taught to convert sadness into silence. It's why love can look like control and grief can be numbness. Emotions don't emerge fully formed. They're translated, filtered, named by the words we've been handed. This isn't just science, it's survival. Society trains us to feel in ways that keep order, that preserve roles, that maintain the myth of who's too emotional and who's rational. But once you realize your emotions were shaped, not chosen, you gain something dangerous: power. The power to rewrite the script, to reclaim what you feel, and to stop apologizing for being human in ways that were never truly yours to begin with. Constructed illness. Constructed illness is the haunting truth that even sickness, what we define as broken, disordered, abnormal, is not always rooted in biology, but in belief. It's the process by which societies decide what counts as ill, what needs to be fixed, and who deserves care. It sounds like science, but it often smells like stigma. It's not just about symptoms, it's about social rules, about bodies and minds that don't behave the right way in a world that fears difference. Throughout history, we've seen it. Homosexuality once labeled a mental disorder, grief pathologized if it lasts too long, women institutionalized for being hysterical, neurodivergent children drugged into silence instead of understood. These were not illnesses until society needed them to be managed, hidden, punished. Because when you label someone sick, you don't have to listen to them. You treat their truth like a symptom, their identity like a problem to be solved. Constructed illness is not a denial of real suffering. People struggle, people hurt, but what this theory exposes is how society shapes that struggle. Who gets empathy, who gets blame, who gets diagnosis, and who gets dismissal. It asks why some conditions are glamorized while others are shamed, why the pain of the privileged is seen as complex, while the pain of the poor is labeled as dysfunction. To call something an illness is to draw a line between the acceptable and the unacceptable, and that line is often drawn by those in power, not those in pain. Constructed illness reminds us that before we call someone broken, we must first ask, who built the definition of brokenness in the first place? Media framing. Media framing is not about what gets shown, it's about how it's shown. It's the lens that colors every headline, every image, every soundbite. It doesn't just inform you, it persuades you, often without your awareness. The frame is the difference between a protest and a riot, a migrant and an invader, a hero and a threat. It tells you where to look, what to feel, and most chillingly, what to ignore. News isn't neutral. Stories don't float to the surface by accident. They're chosen, trimmed, polished, and delivered in ways that shape perception. If a black victim has their mugshot shown, while a white perpetrator has their high school graduation photo plastered on the screen, the message is clear, even when no words are spoken. That's framing. It's not just what's said, it's what's left out. A war is framed as defense, never invasion. A billionaire's success is celebrated, but the labor that built it disappears. Media framing turns complexity into simplicity. It creates villains, martyrs, victims, saviors. It compresses real human lives into symbols, then feeds them to the masses like fast food. And the danger is, once the frame is set, your mind fills in the rest. You see what you've been told to see. You feel what you're supposed to feel. Outrage, fear, sympathy, disgust. And all the while, the real power stays hidden, quietly steering the narrative, untouched, unnamed. Media framing doesn't need to lie. It just needs to choose the angle. And in that choice, it writes the story of the world, not as it is, but as someone wants you to believe it. Social capital. Social capital is the currency no one talks about, but everyone spends. It's not money, it's connection. It's who knows your name in a crowded room, who answers your call, who vouches for you when no one else will. It's the invisible network of trust, loyalty, and access that moves mountains while others are still knocking on locked doors. You can't see it, but you feel it. When someone gets the job with half the qualifications, when a mediocre idea gets funded because the right person pitched it, when second chances are given, but only to people with the right last name, the right school, the right smile. Social capital doesn't live in resumes. It lives in whispers, in nods, in invitations to spaces you don't even know exist. And here's the quiet heartbreak. Not everyone starts with the same amount. Some are born into rich networks where doors open automatically. Others are shut out before they even know there's a door. It's not about how smart you are. It's about who's willing to listen. It's not about how good your work is. It's about who's willing to believe in it. But social capital can also be built slowly, painfully, through trust, through showing up, through helping without keeping score, through being seen, not just as useful, but as human. It's fragile. One betrayal can bankrupt it, but when it's real, when it's earned, it can carry you through storms money can't touch. Social capital decides who rises and who stays forgotten. And the cruelest part? It pretends to be merit, but really, it's privilege in disguise, softened by charm, sustained by access, and mistaken for luck. Relativism. Relativism is the quiet earthquake beneath everything you thought was absolute. It's the unsettling, liberating idea that truth isn't universal, it's contextual, that morality, beauty, intelligence, even reality itself depends on where you stand, what you've lived, and how you've been taught to see. It doesn't say nothing is true, it says many things can be at the same time. We grow up believing in right and wrong like they're carved in stone. But relativism hands you a mirror and says, no, those are carved in you. What's brave in one culture is reckless in another. What's sacred to one is nonsense to someone else. What looks like freedom in your eyes might look like violence in theirs. Relativism doesn't ask you to surrender your values, it dares you to question their origin. It forces you to confront your assumptions. Why do you believe what you believe? Who taught you? Whose stories were never told to you? It pulls the rug from beneath moral certainty and reveals that so many of our judgments are reflections of our position, not proofs of universal truth. Relativism is dangerous to those who crave control, because once people realize there is no single truth, no one-size-fits-all reality, the structures that depend on obedience begin to tremble. Religion, law, nationalism, even language, they all rely on the belief that this is the way. Relativism whispers maybe it's just a way, and that whisper can unravel empires. It can also create compassion, because when you stop needing everyone to see the world as you do, you start to listen, not to agree, but to understand. And that is where real truth begins. Linguistic turn. The linguistic turn is the moment philosophy and the world realize that language doesn't just describe reality, it creates it. It's the awakening that meaning doesn't exist outside of words, that truth is not found, but spoken into being. It's the realization that every thought, every belief, every identity is shaped, limited, and set in motion by the words we use. And once you see that, nothing feels stable anymore. Before the linguistic turn, people believed words were just labels, neatly attached to things already real. But this shift shattered that illusion. Suddenly, it wasn't just about what we meant, it was about what language made possible to mean. You don't see the world as it is, you see the world as your language allows you to. It's why a child learns what a boy is before he even knows who he is. Why entire cultures have no word for depression, and so they suffer in silence, thinking they're simply broken. Why colonizers didn't just conquer land, they erased languages because they knew, destroy the words, and you destroy the world built through them. The linguistic turn exposes how language is never neutral. It reveals how power hides in definitions, how oppression lives in labels, how even silence can scream with meaning depending on who's listening. And once you understand this, you start hearing the violence in polite words, the exclusion in grammar, the cage inside every normal. The linguistic turn doesn't just change how we speak, it changes how we think. It demands that we ask not just, what does this word mean, but who does it serve? Because the right to name is the right to rule, and the right to redefine is the first act of liberation. Positionality. Positionality is the uncomfortable mirror that shows you you are never neutral. You don't see the world from a blank slate. You see it from somewhere, a position, a body, a history. Your race, gender, class, sexuality, ability, nationality, these are not accessories. They are lenses, shaping how you interpret truth, power, and even pain. We're taught to speak as if we're objective, as if truth lives outside of us. But positionality whispers otherwise. It says, you bring your whole self into every interaction, every judgment, every question you ask, and every silence you keep. A white researcher doesn't ask the same questions in a black community as a black one might. A man might overlook what a woman sees immediately, not out of malice, but because of where they stand. Positionality isn't guilt, it's awareness. It asks you to locate yourself before you speak for others, to admit, this is where I'm standing, this is what I've lived, and that means I see this clearly and maybe miss that entirely. It doesn't weaken your voice, it makes it honest. But society resists this idea because positionality means letting go of the illusion of neutrality, and with it, the comfort of authority. It threatens systems built on the myth that some voices are universal, while others are biased. It levels the playing field by saying everyone is shaped by context, and that no one gets to speak from nowhere. To embrace positionality is to stop pretending your voice floats above the world and to start owning exactly where you stand in it. And that ownership, That's where real truth begins. Social world. The social world is not a place, it's a web, a living, breathing network of meanings, expectations, roles, and relationships that define how we exist and who we're allowed to be. It's not built from buildings or laws, but from moments, who you greet, who you ignore, what you wear, what you say, how you say it. Every smile, every silence, every raised eyebrow weaves another thread in the intricate fabric of social life. You don't enter the social world, you're born into it. Before you take your first breath, it's already decided what boxes you'll check: your gender, your race, your class, your worth. You're handed scripts: how to behave, who to love, what success should look like, what pain should sound like, and you don't even realize you're acting. You think it's just you, but it's not. It's the world sculpting you before you can speak. The social world tells you what's beautiful, what's disgusting, what's normal, and what's dangerous. It rewards those who follow its rules and exiles those who don't. But here's the twist: it's not fixed. It feels permanent, but it's always evolving. One protest, one voice, one refusal to conform can ripple through that web and rewrite the rules. And yet, the weight of the social world is heavy. To challenge it is to risk rejection. To obey it is to slowly forget your own shape. It governs how you love, how you grieve, how you dream. It is invisible, but it is everywhere. You can't escape it, but you can learn to see it. And when you do, you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What world made me feel this way?" Reality as negotiated. Reality as negotiated is the haunting, liberating idea that the world you live in, the rules you follow, the truths you believe, the facts you rarely question, isn't fixed. It's agreed upon, constructed, reinforced through repetition, rituals, and relationships. What you call reality isn't written in stone. It's written in conversation, and it can be rewritten. From how we define love, to what counts as crime, to who gets called successful, none of it is objective. It's a series of negotiations between people, institutions, and systems that decide what's real enough to matter. And the most chilling part, you often don't know you're negotiating. You grow up inside the agreement. You inherit the script. You call it the way things are. But look closer. Realize how culture shifts. How one generation's sin becomes another's right. How a word can go from insult to empowerment. How a flag can mean freedom in one place and terror in another. Reality isn't waiting for us to find it. We build it, one conversation, one gesture, one belief at a time. And the people with the most power, they negotiate on behalf of everyone else. They decide what gets remembered, what gets erased, what gets labeled as truth. But when the marginalized speak, when the silenced rise, when the outsiders name their own truth, that negotiation breaks open and the world trembles. To know that reality is negotiated is both terrifying and thrilling. It means nothing is permanent, not injustice, not exclusion, not shame, but it also means nothing changes until someone dares to say, "This isn't my truth, I no longer agree." And suddenly, a new reality begins to unfold. Consensus reality. Consensus reality is the collective dream we mistake for truth, the version of the world we agree to believe in so we can function, fit in, and feel safe. It's not about what is, it's about what enough people say is. It's the reality we build through repetition, media, rituals, laws, language, and silence. And the more people believe in it, the more impossible it feels to question. This is why entire societies once believed the earth was flat, why people were burned for being witches, why skin color was used to justify slavery. Not because these things were real, but because they were agreed upon. Consensus reality is powerful because it doesn't need to be true, it only needs to be shared. It's why we stop at red lights, why we shake hands, why money has value. It's why gender is performed, why status symbols work, why fame matters. None of it exists outside our collective belief. But consensus reality also has a dark edge. It protects itself by punishing deviation. If you question the rules, you're labeled crazy, radical, unstable. If you don't see the same world, the problem must be you. That's the cruelty. The majority defines sanity, and the outlier becomes invisible or institutionalized. Yet, all progress begins when someone dares to see differently, when someone cracks the shared illusion and says, "This isn't real, this was built," because consensus reality can unite, but it can also imprison. And when enough people stop believing in the lie, it stops being reality at all. The dream collapses, and something closer to truth begins to rise. Legitimization. Legitimization is the quiet spell that transforms power into permission. It's how authority becomes acceptable, how inequality becomes justified, how violence is repackaged as protection. Legitimization doesn't scream, it soothes. It tells you, this is the way things should be, and you believe it, not because it's true, but because it's been repeated so many times, in so many ways, by voices that sound official, holy, or rational. It starts with stories, history books that glorify conquest, news reports that frame oppression as order, politicians who speak of war as defense. It lives in institutions that crown themselves with symbols of trust, the robe, the badge, the diploma, the flag. Legitimization is not about having power, it's about making people accept it, even love it. And the most chilling part, you often don't notice it happening. You grow up believing some rules are natural, that some people deserve more, that some bodies must be policed, that some voices don't belong. These beliefs feel like common sense, but they're not. They've been legitimized through culture, through tradition, through repetition. This process hides injustice behind the illusion of fairness. A system that punishes poverty is called justice. A hierarchy of race is defended as heritage. A brutal status quo becomes sacred simply because it has endured, and those who challenge it, they're branded as radicals, criminals, unpatriotic. Legitimization doesn't need facts. It needs performance, a ceremony, a title, a seal of approval. Once something is legitimized, questioning it feels dangerous, but the real danger is in never questioning it at all, because what society accepts without question, it enforces without mercy. Political correctness. Political correctness is a battlefield disguised as manners. It's not just about words, it's about power. It's the tension between those who want language to reflect dignity and those who believe that sensitivity is censorship. To some, political correctness is compassion, protecting the marginalized, correcting the insults woven into everyday speech. To others, it's control, a muzzle on free speech, a threat to tradition, a culture of fear. But at its core, political correctness isn't about being polite. It's about who gets to define reality. When you call someone illegal, you don't just describe them, you condemn them. When you call racism a joke, you don't just deflect, you erase. Political correctness asks, what harm does our language normalize? And that question enrages those who've never had to swallow their identity just to feel safe in a room. Critics cry, you can't say anything anymore, but what they really mean is, you can't say it without consequences, because now people are pushing back. They're naming the wounds words leave behind. They're refusing to laugh along. They're saying, that's not okay. And for those used to speaking without resistance, that feels like oppression, but it's not. It's accountability. Political correctness is not about perfection. It's about intention. It's not about silencing people. It's about lifting the ones who've been silenced for too long. Yes, it's messy. Yes, it's imperfect. But at its heart, it asks a radical question. What if we built a world where everyone's dignity mattered enough to be named, respected, protected? And for some, that's terrifying, because it means their version of the world is no longer the only one that counts. Collective consciousness. Collective consciousness is the invisible current that connects us all, the shared beliefs, values, fears, and instincts that bind a society together. You don't see it, you feel it. It's the reason strangers cry together at funerals they weren't invited to, the reason crowds erupt in joy at a national victory, the reason people mourn celebrities like they've lost family. It's not individual grief or joy, it's ours. Emile Durkheim called it the soul of society, a force greater than any one person, yet made entirely of people. It's the pulse behind tradition, the reason rituals matter, the reason you stand in silence during an anthem, even if you don't know why. It lives in culture, in language, in holidays, in hashtags. It's the emotional glue that turns isolated individuals into a people. But here's what makes collective consciousness so powerful and so dangerous. It doesn't ask for your opinion. It absorbs you. It rewards those who conform. It marks those who deviate. When the collective decides what's sacred, questioning it becomes blasphemy. When the collective fears, it punishes the different. When it loves, it forgets to question. It can heal, yes. It can unite, uplift, mobilize. But it can also oppress, exclude, destroy. History is full of horrors justified by shared belief, but also full of revolutions that began when that belief shifted. To feel the collective consciousness is to feel part of something larger than yourself. To shape it is to change the world, and to resist it, that takes a courage most never find, because to stand against it is to risk being alone in a world built on belonging. Knowledge as power. Knowledge as power is the raw, electrifying truth that information isn't neutral. It's a weapon. It can liberate or enslave. It can build a nation or break a soul. What you know shapes what you believe, how you act, and what you're allowed to become. And that's why power doesn't just control people, it controls knowledge. It decides what is taught, what is erased, what is remembered, and what is buried. Michel Foucault didn't just say knowledge is power, he showed us that they are the same thing. Whoever defines knowledge defines reality. Schools don't just teach facts, they teach obedience. Textbooks don't just tell history, they tell a history edited and approved. Science, law, religion all claim authority, but behind that authority is a question: who decides what counts as truth? When knowledge is hoarded, so is power. That's why literacy was once outlawed for slaves, why indigenous languages were stripped away, why governments censor, why women were banned from classrooms, why queer identities were erased from psychology, why the internet is monitored. Because to know is to resist, to question, to see through the curtain, and power fears that. But knowledge alone isn't power. Access to knowledge is, control over it is, and those in power know that to keep a population compliant, you don't need guns, you need distraction, misinformation, fear. You make people forget their own history, doubt their own instincts, beg for answers you've already buried. When someone hands you knowledge, always ask, whose voice is missing, whose silence made this possible? Because every truth you're given came at the cost of another one being shut out. And if you can find that truth, you don't just hold power, you become it.